Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. There's actually some Ohio State fans in there. Our guy insured by Big is already talking all that mess about LSU recruiting in the chat. Our resident LSU fan, and we love that guy. Fans of any team that we're going to talk about today, there's going to be some non-Notre Dame topics today. But today, Sean Davis is with me. We're going to do our RTCF show. What that stands for those who don't know, R, recruiting. We're going to talk Notre Dame recruiting. T, Notre Dame team topics. And then CF is college football. Recruiting-wise, Sean, Notre Dame had a big week last week. We're going to talk about that, what it means, talk about some of the specifics. Won't give into too deep into the specifics because that's why you got to be on the premium message board. And then we'll also our team topic today, Sean, is year 2 under Mike Denbrock. What does that look like, and why should Notre Dame fans be very optimistic about this offense in 2025? And how does Mike Denbrock's history impact that? And then number 3, Sean, the college football topic, we're going to talk all things quarterback. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Sean and I are going to rank our top 5 returning starting quarterbacks, meaning guys that are starting, returning starters at the school they played at last year. We're going to then rank our top 5 transfer quarterbacks, so new transfers for this year. And then we're going to rank our 5 first-year starters, so guys who are starting for the first time. With one exception, it's guys who have never none of them have ever been full-year starters. We've had a couple of these guys make spot starts because of injury. And then one guy started a little bit as a freshman at another school. But we're going to talk about them, Sean, because it's a very interesting year. And I think the way that quarterback play now is with the portal, you've got to kind of break rankings down into different categories because of those different reasons. And I'm very, very much looking forward to that. So, Sean, without further ado, man, are you ready to rock and roll on today's RTCF show?
Let's get it.
Well, Sean, we're going to talk a little recruiting at first because you have been a very busy man the last week on the Irish Breakdown Premium Lounge or Premium Board at Champions Lounge, which you can find at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Sean's had a lot of intel out. I've put, I think, 4 intel pieces out over the last week as well, just breaking down how things went. We're going to get into some of the specifics of how the recruiting went, but really what was big about this last week, Sean, is yes, there were some big-time players on campus, and yes, the things went well, and but this was really our first chance to see this new look recruiting staff sort of operating together. So obviously the Notre Dame coaches are doing their thing, but Becca Seitz has got a promotion. You've got Jordan Blake's new, Mike Martin's new, Myron Tungavaloa-Mosa is definitely not new to Notre Dame, but he's new to that new role. You've got some guys that are no longer with Notre Dame. The last time Notre Dame had a big recruiting weekend, Chad Bowden had just left Notre Dame, and Caleb Davis was still with the team. Chad, obviously now the general manager at USC. Caleb Davis got hired as the new general manager at San Diego State, which is a great opportunity for him. And so now you've got this new look staff. First time to see Chris Ash and Jawan Sider. Neither one of them were hired when the last time Notre Dame had a recruiting weekend. So it's crazy to think about. It's been less than 2 months. A lot has changed since Notre Dame's last recruiting weekend, Sean, and it was our first chance to really see this staff in action. And with a couple little small minor things that aren't even worth getting into, I was impressed with how smoothly things ran and how well organized a lot of this stuff was when you consider how many different moving pieces and moving parts there were on the staff.
Yeah, I talked to multiple recruits and their families, and I heard one thing that was consistent. Practice was fast and efficient. Fast and efficient. Not only the speed with the players, but the way that the team moved. They operated as a team in a program that knew exactly what they were expected to do and what was expected of them, whether it was drills or when they got into actual action. They moved at a rate that was like, we are who we are and we know what we're doing. You love hearing that. One of the recruits I talked to said for a day 2 practice in the spring, man, that was pretty impressive. And so that bodes well. Something that we always talked about in recruiting, that the recruiting will be impacted by the product on the field. And that's not in the fall. That's also in these practices. When you see better players in practices and more speed in practices, it's a more impressive product to sell for the staff and for the coaches when these players come in for these visits, Brian. So I think a lot of people, because of the lack of offers leading up to the pot of gold and other schools jumping out early, but to put in context, because that's the place that those programs are in, they have to jump out early. Notre Dame is transitioning to a different place where they're kind of lurking, and they've become big fish hunters or big game hunters in recruiting. And when you do that, most of those guys, you're not really going to get them to commit extra early. Some will, but the vast majority of them, especially at certain positions, is going to go down to these official visits in June. And so you're really building a case for yourself that's going to lead to the closing argument that is the official visit for most of these recruits when they come in the months of June and July. And Notre Dame did an excellent job last week. Even with the change in staff, there is still continuity. That's what I felt like. In a short time, would they be able to achieve similar continuity? Not the same, but a similar type of continuity that existed when Chad Bowden was here, which deals with messaging, execution, and then being able to get kids to commit to coming back for official visits. Yeah. That is a game plan that seems like is working right now for the Fighting Irish and this entire staff.
Yeah, for me, the C word I would use is consistency. You know, is there consistency of approach? Is there consistency from messaging to standpoint? You know, one of the things that I heard, which was very interesting, was the presentation that was given to Rodney Dunham, for example. Something like that doesn't get put together if you're not like, okay, this is exactly how this visit is going to go, and this is what we're trying to accomplish, and these are what the objectives are. This is how we think that we need to express to Rodney how great the fit here is on and off the field, as an example. And so kudos to the staff in a lot of regards. And obviously, you know, a guy that I want to give a big shout out to is Carter Allman for Notre Dame, because he's the one guy that's here. He had to kind of make sure everybody – look, Jordan Blake's been hired for a week. How is he going to be able to sell Notre Dame when he's only been here less than a week? Well, that's where the people that are here, Carter and Becca Seitz, and obviously the coaching staff are all – Mike Martin's not going to be able to tell necessarily Jordan Blake on how to sell Notre Dame. That's up to Marcus Freeman and obviously the coaches, but then also Carter Allman. You know, seeing Mike Martin around a lot, seeing him in pictures with different players, things went extremely well. And then, as you mentioned, Sean, the feedback from the players is what truly matters. Doesn't really matter what we think. It matters what the kids that they're trying to recruit think. We can think, oh, man, these Notre Dame guys, they nailed it. And the kids are like, yeah, it was all right. Well, then they didn't nail it. We can think, man, this is the dumbest visit weekend ever. And if the kids are all like, they nailed it, then they're like, guess what? Then they nailed it, because it doesn't matter what we think. It matters what the recruits think. And the feedback, as you mentioned, has been really just spectacular. Notre Dame made some huge moves this weekend. And that's kind of this next piece of it, Sean, is, I mean, we can talk all we want about, you know, the organization was great and they had this presentation and they did all these things and that thing. And look, there's been weekends where, as a recruiting coordinator, I thought I had a great plan going in, but just we didn't connect with kids. We weren't able to really move the needle with kids. You're going to have that as a recruiting staff. I thought Notre Dame, it's really, and this isn't even being hyperbolic, Sean. This isn't even being hyperbolic at all. I don't know how this weekend could have gone any better. Well, what if kids would have committed? They weren't really pushing for that. What Notre Dame is looking to do is lay a foundation for getting a kid to decide when he wants to decide. We've talked about this. In this particular class, they're not pushing for kids to make quick decisions. They're trying to get kids to commit when they're ready to be truly committed, which hopefully leads to fewer decommitments and fewer flipping. And, you know, hey, why take a commitment from a kid who absolutely plans on taking more visits? There's no need for that because he's not really committed. Notre Dame made some big moves this weekend. And we're going to go kind of in order of the visits. And I want to start off with a guy, Sean Joey O'Brien, cornerback from Pennsylvania that was on campus this weekend. 6'4", 190-pound kid, cornerback, safety, wide receiver. He's being recruited all over. You talk to his coach. Notre Dame's recruiting him as a corner, but they're like, dude, we'll play you wherever. Most other schools are recruiting him as a safety. And then he said, the interesting note, his head coach said, Ole Miss is actually recruiting him as a wide receiver, which I thought was interesting. Notre Dame knocked it out of the park, Sean. Look, I've said this for a while. I've felt they have been his leader for a while, with Penn State a close number 2. I think Notre Dame pushed it even further this weekend. They did an absolutely phenomenal job this weekend with Joey O'Brien, and really he had some new people he had to get to know. Chris Ash, obviously Mike Martin. But the nice thing for him is that 2 of the best relationships he has are people that are still here, including obviously Mike Mickens. And getting to see Mike Mickens in action, I thought was huge for him. But it was a great weekend to remind Joey of why Notre Dame has kind of been there from the beginning. And coming out of that visit, Sean, I absolutely love. I said it on, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday night. The next morning, people start throwing out crystal balls. It's like, this is why you need to be on the message board, because you didn't know this last night. But they really did. Some of that stuff is fluffy and it's clickbait. It really is. And there's still work to be done with Joey. He's not done yet. He's still going to take some other visits. But I think Notre Dame absolutely put themselves in position to as the very clear team to beat at this point in time for Joey O'Brien.
Yeah, when I talked to his head coach, Brett Gordon, he made it very and abundantly clear that most of the schools that are coming after him view him eventually playing the safety position. But early on, they are open, like you said, to playing them just about anywhere. And it was very interesting that you look at a kid like this. His head coach said, he's our Travis Hunter. Like, he never comes off the field. He's the number 1 wide receiver in the state and the number 1 defensive back in the state. So that just lets you know how versatile and uniquely talented he is. He also said right now, he said, we know what he's listed as, but I can tell you right now, he's at 6'5", and we're not sure whether or not he's going to stop growing. So that's just crazy that this kid is 6'5", going on 215 pounds right now. And he comes in, has a fantastic visit, and go ahead.
I just got to say one thing. I know his coach told you that, Sean, but I stood next to Joey at practice. He's not 250 pounds.
Oh, well,
that's not high school. I'm just saying, like, that's not high school. Like, I was 6'1", 195 on my high school senior roster, and somehow miraculously I was 6 foot, $180 my freshman year of college. I don't know what happened. You know what I mean? But he is a really impressive looking kid, though, man. He is really long kid.
He really is. And so when you talk about his recruitment, according to his head coach, is going to come down, in his opinion, to a gut feeling. It's going to come down to where he feels at home. And I think that goes back to what you mentioned. Even though we had some departures from the staff that he was in communication with, if more than likely, or not more than likely, it's evident that the core of the relationships and the important relationships still exist on this staff.
Right.
He came to meet the other people that are new and replace those that are departed. And so he got a great feeling with those and great interaction with those people during his visit. I just think ultimately something that I believe his coach couldn't directly say, but you pick up on it, is that being a Pennsylvania kid and being the number 1 player in Pennsylvania, there is a lot of local pressure for him to go to the big state school. That's obvious. It's Penn State. And most people think that Penn State is the most obvious program to threaten Notre Dame in this recruitment. And I think Clemson is lingering still in this recruitment as well. So when you talk about that, and you start listening to his head coach talk about gut feel and go with what he loves and what feels like home, you start to think that that's leaning more towards Notre Dame from all of the reports that we're getting from several avenues and several contributaries that we talk to. So I really believe that Joey O'Brien, right now, Notre Dame is sitting right there at the top. The relationship is right there at the top. This is a great kid on and off the field, full of integrity. Although the one thing I love that his head coach said, to be the guy that he is, and everybody knows who he is the guy that is more about his teammates than anybody else. He is a true leader. He is about the team. And that lets me know further that he is an even greater fit to the Notre Dame culture and what Marcus Freeman always preaches about. So the visit went great. Could it have gone better? I don't think so, Brian. I think, like you said, it was more of a reaffirmation. That's really was, different than some of the other kids that we're going to talk about. For this, it was just reaffirming what Joey O'Brien already felt about Notre Dame.
And making sure that was still there with the changes. I mean, that's an important part of that, is making sure that you still feel that way, even with the new D coordinator and things along those lines. Another guy, Sean, that was on campus with Joey at the same time was actually, he stayed actually a little bit longer than Joey, because Joey had to go compete at he was in a 7-on-7 tournament, so he had to leave a little bit earlier. But a guy that was with him was Javion Osborne, running back from Forney, Texas. And look, this is a kid that Notre Dame's been recruiting for a while, and it was a very interesting recruitment because the staff liked him a lot. And I think he liked Notre Dame, and he liked Dylan McCullough quite a bit. I think he liked Dylan McCullough a little bit more than he liked Notre Dame, to be honest with you. And this is a kid that Jawan Sider did not recruit at Penn State. He did not offer him at Penn State. And we've expressed this when Jawan Sider was hired. There's no one on the roster, I think, from Texas. There's no one on their roster, I think, from California, maybe like one kid from each state. There's just certain areas they don't recruit the way that Notre Dame does. They didn't have anybody on the roster from Missouri, nobody on the roster from Arizona. It's a different animal. But it wasn't to say that Jawan Sider was doing something wrong. It's just like, this isn't a kid you have a relationship with because you didn't really recruit him at the previous school. And so coming into the visit, Notre Dame was very clearly the team that was, I was top 5 or 6 schools, and he likes Notre Dame, but they were clearly at the bottom of that list. And we've said so, and our intel had said, like, Notre Dame staff didn't feel like they were in a great position coming into the visit, but they did like the kid a lot. Like, they love him. It just was more of I don't know that he loves us the way that he loves Michigan and, some of these other schools in Texas and some different schools like that. So it was, how's that kind of going to go? Well, he comes on the visit, and by the middle of the first visit, he's texting with Nick Kramer being like, man, it's blowing me away. By the end of his first day, he was there 3 days. He got there like on Tuesday night and stayed till Thursday. So he was there 3 parts of 3 days. And by the end of the visit, he was telling us, and we put it out there publicly, this isn't a hidden thing, Notre Dame might be my new number 1. Well, then talking to different intel, that was also the impression that people at Notre Dame got from that visit. Now, listen, long way to go at Javion Osborne. He's going to visit Michigan again. There's other schools that are pushing for him. If Texas misses a couple backs that they're going after and they ramp up things with him, does that change things a little bit? Still a ways to go with Javion Osborne. But, Sean, they absolutely crushed it to where coming into the visit, I'm telling everybody, look, they love him, but they're probably not in a great place there. By the end of the visit, Notre Dame is arguably the school to beat for him. That is a great place to be, man. An absolutely great place to be for Notre Dame. Also, Texas A&M is another in-state school you worry about. They just got a kid from Jonathan Hatton this past weekend. So things are kind of falling in place, and Notre Dame making the move they made was big time for Notre Dame and as they make a push for Javion Osborne.
I think with a kid like Javion Osborne, customization of the visit is very important. I think Notre Dame did a great job of customizing the actual experience of the visit for each and every guy that came in that we're going to be talking about. And so for him, when you see him, being a kid that fell in love, first of all, with the tradition, you see him taking the pictures with the Heisman and just taking in everything that is Notre Dame. And then that, for me, when a kid could come in and you don't have to sell Notre Dame, they could just absorb what it is immediately and recognize how special it is. That's the introductory work that the staff doesn't have to do, because some kids get it, right? And that lets you know the type of kid that he is, and it gives you a little hint of what he values. I'm very interested in seeing how Notre Dame now goes ahead and attacks this, right? Are they super aggressive with this, and letting him know that you're one of our guys? Or do they sit back and allow him to go ahead and go through the process and then sit back and wait to once again pounce when he comes in for the official visit, feeling like they've done enough to keep themselves in the mix firmly until that official visit comes? But like you said, this might have been the biggest move of the weekend, from where they began to where they ended up. And like you said, for him in the middle of that recruitment to communicate with Nick Kramer, like Notre Dame might be my new number one. That's absolutely fantastic. And we know, both of us know that guy up in Michigan, he can recruit. So it's going to be a battle.
Yes.
He's going to be a battle.
Well,
but something else I want to point out. I think sometimes you receive blessings when it looks like you've taken a step back. And I truly believe, delivering truth should be done in love. That's something we believe in, Brian, because of our faith, because that's what the word says. And I think sometimes that truth in love can come in different packages. I think Thielen McCullough had respect from his guys and a lot of recruits because he was able to be honest and speak truth in love, but it came in a different package than, say, a Jawan Sider, who was a little bit more charismatic, who's, as his wide running backs talked about when they met the media, he is super funny. He is entertaining. He can bring you in and give a different experience. I don't think Thielen McCullough is that. Their personalities are a little bit different.
He was more of a mentor, father figure,
absolutely.
That kind of thing, right?
And Jawan Sider, they both work. They both absolutely work. But for this particular individual and for what was needed, the personality of Jawan Sider might have actually been the perfect personality to come in and host this young man along with the rest of the staff. Yeah. So, all things kind of work together for Notre Dame in this thing for them to be at the position they are with the talented running back out of Texas.
And just so you guys know, when a kid tells us, hey, Notre Dame's my top school or whatever, and Nick Kramer will tell you this, I said, ask him if he's okay with us putting that out there publicly. Because sometimes I want a young man to feel comfortable talking to our team and be able to say things without knowing that we're just going to go run with whatever they tell us and then just put it out there. And then all of a sudden the kid doesn't want to talk to us anymore. So I said, they know that, hey, the visit went great. I like this. They know that's all going to be out there. But when a kid tells us Notre Dame's my new number one, this, Sean, I always tell my team, ask him if he's okay with us putting that out there. And he was like, yeah, go for it. Put that. So he was gung-ho. He was fired up. He was ready to go. And they did a great job there. So excellent job. Long way to go. He still has visits coming up to, let me find his visit list here real quick. He still has visits coming up. He's got USC still coming up. He has Michigan coming up. He had Florida State. He just made his visit to Florida State. He'll be doing a visit to Michigan this week. He was set to do a visit to Miami on April 4th. They just landed Javion Mallory. And then he's got USC on April 22nd. So, and then of course, Texas is a school that's just right now they're not pushing for him, which I don't understand. But if they start to push for him, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, that's going to be an interesting deal. But Notre Dame right now is absolutely big time in the mix for this young man. Another player, Sean, and we'll kind of move into the weekend visits, the ones that kind of started Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Big one was Rodney Dunham, defensive end of North Carolina. Now, what I said coming into the visit, Sean, is a year ago, Notre Dame absolutely knocked that recruitment out of the park, crushed it with Rodney, and he really felt like, man, I can see myself being at Notre Dame. And then his recruitment kind of started to blow up. And then he got injured during his senior year or junior year. That caused some teams to back off, but not most, because most are like, not a big deal injury, and he's a stud. And all of a sudden, Georgia's going after him, and Clemson and South Carolina and all these schools are kind of going after him. And Notre Dame wasn't able to get him back on campus again. And they faded with Rodney. But that was one of those ones where I felt like getting him back on campus is huge because you can kind of remind him of why he was so high on you a year ago. And Notre Dame absolutely crushed that. I put the intel out, Sean. We put updates on the message board, so I know that now today people are making predictions for him. But you'd have known about this yesterday and the day before that if you're on the premium board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. They did a phenomenal job. I detail what the phenomenal job was in my intel piece. I'm actually going to put that on the board. I'm going to put that in the chat here. So if you're a board member and you missed that, you'll be able to click on that and go there. And if you're not a board member, then guess what? It'll take you right there and you'll get a chance to kind of read through it and look at it. But it wasn't just that they here's the thing with Rodney. Here's kind of what it boils down to, Sean, as I'm putting that link in the chat now. Rodney is a great fit for Notre Dame. It was just about reminding him why he's such a great fit for Notre Dame. It was about reminding him that he's a young man that values a strong education. He's someone who values being pushed. And one of the pitches that Notre Dame had was kind of talking about areas where his game needs to improve. I'll just kind of leave it at that. You guys can read the update. And just the way that Al Washington and the staff really delivered the message to him just absolutely resonated with him and the family. And that was a big piece to this is you've got to remind him why he loved you so much at the beginning. And now all these schools are coming. And I do think that in some ways his injury helped Notre Dame a little bit because he realized, like, look, I got to look beyond football. And then Notre Dame never backed off of me when I got injured. They never said, hey, let's see how the injury. They never backed down. And I think they did a great job. But again, there's work to be done. There's still some more visits scheduled, Sean. But I think this is one where Notre Dame made a huge leap that's more expected. I kind of expected them to knock this one out of the park, and they absolutely did. And I think Notre Dame with Rodney Dunham is once again the team to beat. And you all know, like somebody's in the chat, like I remembered Nathaniel Usu-Boateng saying it was like family too. We never told you that Nathaniel Usu-Boateng was going to come to Notre Dame. We told you that some people at Notre Dame felt good about it, but we always said, I believe it when I see it. I just never felt the fit was there. With Rodney Dunham, the fit is absolutely there. This is a young man, and he's also a Charlotte kid that knows Bryce Young. They know each other well, so that relationships helps. We've said before, kids coming to a campus like Notre Dame and seeing people that they view are like them, which most people, more than anything else, when I talk about like, we're all tribal as people. We're just naturally tribal in a lot of ways, and a lot of that has to do with where you're from. So when you're from a certain town and you go somewhere and you're like, hey, like I remember being on a cruise one time, so my wife, and there's these people and somebody was like, hey, anyone from Ohio? And I was like, I grew up there. For the rest of the trip, this lady and her dude kept feeling like every time they'd do like, OH, and I'm like, dude, I don't do that crap. But you know what I mean? But like, oh, you losers. I'm kidding a little bit. They were nice. But like they just felt they didn't know anything about me. They just knew we're from the same place you're from. We've connected now. And we're all like that. And so to some degree. And so when he gets there and he sees Bryce Young, he sees Micah Gilbert performing well, they start talking to him about, where the Yaquars are from? They're from Charlotte. You start having these conversations about, hey, this pipeline, you see Jadon Blair performing well. Hey, he's not from Charlotte, but he's from North Carolina. All of a sudden, you start saying like, hey man, these cats are doing it. Other D linemen have done it. There's two guys. One guy didn't get drafted, but he went on to have like a 10-year NFL career and made a bunch of money. The other guy got drafted in the third round. It's like, hey, I can do this. This pipeline is there for me. And Notre Dame made sure that he bumped into all the kids from North Carolina during his couple-day visit. There's some things that got to get worked out now, Sean. As you know, it's like there's some other visits and NIL packages to all these kids have got to be worked out. But I love where Notre Dame is at with this one. And I'll say this is the least surprising. It went great of the weekend of the guys that I didn't already think they led for. Obviously, Joey O'Brien. But like this is the one where I was most expecting Notre Dame to make a big move because of the relationship that Al Washington has built with him. And because of the fact that I think of all these players, there may not be a better quote unquote Notre Dame fit amongst this whole group than Rodney Dunham.
This reminded me of a 23 recruit. And we thought right around this time that Notre Dame had faded. And one of the Notre Dame coaches says he's a Notre Dame fit, but he has to realize that he's a Notre Dame fit. And that young man was Christian Gray, who at that time we thought Ohio State and LSU, because of the connection with his former high school coach now being on the staff at LSU, had taken a lead for Christian Gray. And Mike Mickens, go ahead.
I remember having this conversation and all the reports were coming out about LSU and Ohio State. And I remember talking to somebody and I said, are y'all worried about this? He's like, no. I said, why are you? I mean, he was telling us all the right things, but he was also telling LSU people and Ohio State people how much he loved their schools. And there was all these, I think there was even some crystal balls kind of for him to those schools. And at least people saying like Notre Dame had faded. And they're like, no, we haven't faded. You know, like we're going to be fine. We're going to, at the end of the day, when he makes it, and I said, he goes, because he is a Notre Dame kid. We just have to remind him of that. And then when Christian came back after going through everyone in the country telling him how great, and he came back to Notre Dame, it was a wrap. It was like, oh yeah, he's right back to number one, you know. And it just like you said, Sean, it was like sometimes you kind of get all these schools coming at you and selling you all these wonderful things, but then you go back to that one place and you're just like, yeah, that's right. This is the move. This is home, because this is truly the place where I'm most comfortable. And I felt like that was possible for Rodney coming into this trip, and it looks like they did a pretty good job with that.
And then I'll just add on top of this that Notre Dame has done an incredible job. Not only did they go and visit Rodney Dunham, Ebenezer Tade, Akeem Aboko, two teammates that are going to be coming in together on April 5th for their unofficial visit. They just hit the state of North Carolina, and then Marcus Freeman went right back the next week and doubled down.
Yeah.
Like he understood the assignment when it came to top talents like Rodney Dunham and those two teammates that are going to be coming in on April 5th. So now they're starting to see some of that harvest start to bloom a little bit and come forth during these official visits, starting with Rodney Dunham. I assume they're going to do an incredible job. Shout out to Archer. Do an incredible job coming up on April 5th and then going on in to the official visits in June and July. So I'm not shocked. You know, I'm not shocked at all. And Rodney Dunham, you could tell how close he is with his family and how much family matters to him. If you've seen him at other visits that he's gone on at other schools, it's been him, his sister, his mom, his dad. They all go together.
And the thing is, they're not together. Like his parents I don't believe are together.
I didn't know
like
that
they have come exactly, but they have come together. Like, look, you know what I mean? Like they're they're both there. And they're both playing their role, because being a parent is more important than any of that other mess.
It's rare for us to see when the parents are together.
Right.
Both parents are the full family intact
we just
on these visits. Right. You know, usually it's the dad that comes, or usually it's the mom because of work schedule. Sometimes it's the coaches that have to come because the parents can't get away from work. Right. It's a lot of different things. But in this particular case, it's about family. It's about Phil. It's about Notre Dame doing a great job customizing everything that was going to be able to pierce and get through to the heart of Rodney Dunham to make him realize this is the place I need to be.
And I think everyone in the family feels that way too. And that's the thing that encourages me about this recruitment, because you don't have a mom or a dad, from what I can tell, pulling him in another direction. I think they're all like, hey, we're going to let him make his decisions best for him. We're going to guide him in this process. But there's not like there's a lot of, not pro Notre Dame, like his family's pushing him to Notre Dame, but there's a lot of support should he make that decision. There's no like, hey, you need to stay close to home, from what I've been able to gather so far in this one, which is important. Another interesting recruitment, Sean, this weekend is, and I don't have as much on this one because we like to get intel from both sides. I don't really have it from both sides just yet, but it does sound like things went really well with Ian Premer, the tight end, that I would argue is the number one tight end on the board. Still waiting to hear back more from him, but the early feedback has been very good. There's another DB, Sean, that visited this weekend that Mike Mickens is very high on, and that's Aiden Pouncey from Florida. Now, this is a really interesting one because you don't often see a school recruit a kid whose brother decommitted from that school. And if you remember correctly, his older brother was committed to Notre Dame as a wide receiver as part of the 2017 class, decommitted after the 4-8 season, and then after Mike Denbrock and those guys were fired, his brother decommitted. He came with him on the visit this weekend, which I thought was very interesting to see him. I think it's Jordan is the older brother. To see there's pictures of him actually, and I'm like, wow, he's grown up quite a bit in the last 10 years. But he ended up signing with Texas, but he was committed to Notre Dame for a long time. Then obviously when the coaching changes happened with the court, Mike Denbrock and all that, because remember at the time Mike Denbrock was the receivers coach as well as the offensive coordinator. And so he decommitted and went to Texas and those type of things. But he was on the visit with them this weekend. And that's just a really interesting dynamic for me, Sean, to kind of see that. But, from what I can tell so far, things went really well with Aiden Pouncey. Notre Dame made a very strong first impression on Aiden. That's one where they put themselves in the game. I don't know that I'd say they put themselves number one. They just gave themselves a chance. This is one of those ones, Sean, that you talked about at the very beginning. This is one of those ones you need to knock it out of the park to make sure you get them back in the summer, because that's going to tell you. And that's how it was with Ian Premer. It was never going to be with Aiden Pouncey and Ian Premer. You're going to come, or it was unlikely that you're going to come out of the visit as like the clear-cut number one, no doubt about it. I didn't think that was going to happen with Javion Osborne either, so it can happen. But this was more about, look, let's crush this visit so that way we can put ourselves in that top group and convince him to come back in the summer for an official. That's when you know. And so I think that that's going to be the next step with both of those young men, is making sure that they can lock that in. But they did make a good move. Things went very well. The feedback has been really, really, really good so far. Our feedback on the Pouncey side was very strong. Our feedback from the Notre Dame side is very strong. They definitely made a move, and they've made themselves a player for that. Long way to go with Aiden Pouncey, but excellent job for Notre Dame. And for him, a lot of it was, Sean, it's a lot like the other guys. Like, he is a very unique fit. He's a very unique young man. He's not your typical Florida recruit, skill player Florida recruit. He's a very good fit at Notre Dame. He's a lot more like a Dallas Golden than maybe some of the other guys that Notre Dame has tried to recruit unsuccessfully from Florida. And so they needed him to see that firsthand. And I believe this was his first visit to campus. At the very least, it was his first visit since he's in the recruiting process. Maybe he came with his brother, but he would have been like, what? That was 27. That'd have been like 9 years ago. He'd have been like a kid. It's a little different animal, even if he did come during that time. This is his first visit as a recruit, and I don't know that it could have gone any better for what they were trying to accomplish, which was to put themselves in a game, and they are. Now the next step is going to be locking in that official visit for him and for Ian Premer. But the staff did a strong job with those guys as well.
That's an interesting tidbit that his brother, Jordan Pouncey, was with him. And I think what it shows is that even though a decision was made to decommit and ultimately land in Texas, you still have, these recruits, regardless of the school, they have relationships that are longstanding, and they have respect for people, for staffs and schools that have been part of their recruiting process. And I think Jordan Pouncey, for the most part, probably had a really good experience in his recruitment that led him to commit to Notre Dame. And then ultimately some things and some changes that he saw with the disappointing season
uncertainty
and the change in uncertainty led, kind of put him in a position where he had to do what he felt like was best for him at that point in time. But there was still profound respect for what he eventually committed to initially. And so when that school comes back around, he could talk to his brother and say, man, I don't know what it's like now, but I remember what it was. I remember what I fell in love with when they were recruiting me. So I can let you know that. And now from there, that's a great foundation for Notre Dame to have somebody that's been through the process, that committed. Most people might look at the decommitment as a negative. You can look at that, but it has to be contextualized to what happened and what were the surrounding circumstances. But ultimately, this was someone that did love what Notre Dame offered on and off the field, that's now connected to Aiden Pouncey and his decision process. And so if he was willing to leave Florida, you would think that Aiden Pouncey, with all the Southern schools after him, Oregon, USC, other schools, big time schools, that he's talked to Nick. Nick has done a great job, speaking to him and covering his recruitment. I think it's fair to say that Notre Dame knows that they're a player in this, but it's not going to be as easy as some people might think, just because it's a defensive back. Even Mike Mickens has his own little tussles and battles he has to go out and overcome.
I think the role for Jordan is more of, hey, I've been through this process before, and let me guide you through the process. Jordan had to make what the best decision was for Jordan, and I think that from what I understand, Jordan's role and Jordan's objective in supporting his younger brother is not to steer him, because Jordan committed to Notre Dame, signed with Texas, transferred to Florida. So I think his role is not so much to try to steer his brother as much as it's, look, here's what I liked about the process, what I didn't like, what worked, what didn't work, the things I wish I would have, because like we all have that. You know, I've said this, if I'd have known coming out of high school what I know now, and my dad has said this too, like if he would have known when I was being recruited what I knew 10 years later after playing and then coaching, we would have handled my recruitment way different. Neither one of my parents graduated high school, much less went to college. You know what I mean? So it's like we had no idea what questions to ask and things like that. The nice thing about having an older brother like Jordan is that he has been through the process. He's seen the good and the bad of college football life. And so he can explain to his brother, like, look, these are the questions I wish I would have asked when I was going through this process. And here's the different things that I went through. But your experience will be different. At the end of the day, you got to make what's best decision for you. And that may be Notre Dame, that may be somewhere else. But it's you understand that because I'm sure every recruit goes through things where like, yeah, I was told this, but it wasn't quite like that. So you start saying, oh, here, look, they can tell you this, this, and this. That doesn't ultimately matter. Here's what actually matters. And I think that's the role and you see that with a lot of dads who went through the process, Sean. We see that with a lot of dads that were college football players. Is like, look, I'm not trying to steer my kid to a school. I'm just trying to help him understand how to navigate this process. And so I think it's good that Aiden has someone like Jordan to kind of help him to navigate the process wherever he ends up. And that's always a positive. Just a couple 27, 28 notes, Sean. Notre Dame hosted a couple 27 D tackles to keep an eye on. Devin Robertson and Braden Parks. Sean has a really good update on Devin Robertson on the board. That's the Mississippi kid, right, Sean? Devin Robertson is.
Yeah.
So definitely check out the message board for Sean's update on Devin Robertson. They did a phenomenal job with that one. And then Braden Parks also, we're working to get some more feedback on that one. But from what I've gathered so far, did a great job on him. I did not know this. He is Chris Zorch's godson. So that doesn't hurt, so that certainly helps a little bit. But obviously knows a lot of the Chicago kids that have come to Notre Dame recently and is very familiar with who Chris Burgess is and all that. So they did a really nice job there. They also are recruiting a 28 kid that was on campus this weekend. Yeah, keep this name in your minds, folks. Kellen Hall, 28 defensive linemen that visited this weekend. Notre Dame loves that kid. He had a great visit to Notre Dame this weekend. And then last thing, Sean, is I don't want to necessarily get into the Trey Taylor stuff right now. You've got some intel on the board. You're going to have an article coming out later today. I just want to say this. 27 recruiting, the thing that we gathered from this past weekend, talking to different sources, and then, of course, you talking to Trey, it sounds like for Notre Dame, they're going to bring in, because they've got a bunch of 27 quarterbacks coming on campus. They've already had some. They've hosted 2 already, and then they're getting ready to bring the Bork kid, Borke. I forget. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Then there's Malachi Ziegler is going to be coming on campus soon. So what we were told is that they're telling the players that they're bringing you in on a visit. They're getting to know you, show Notre Dame. Then Gino Gaduli is going to go on the road here in the spring. He's going to evaluate all these quarterbacks, see them throw, and then make decisions on who to offer after that. I'm going to have some thoughts on that, Sean, that I'm going to put on the message board later today. But I just want to let people know don't start asking yourself, gee, are they going to offer this kid or that kid when he visits? Most likely not. Now, that may change where they get a feel like if we don't offer this kid during his visit, we're out of the game on this one. Maybe they feel that way when Malachi Ziegler visits or something like that. But just right now, that's what we're told the plan is. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that right now. We'll have more of that conversation on the board, but I just want to get people to understand that with all these 27 quarterbacks coming, and the reality is they have not offered a single one of them. We don't anticipate that happening anytime soon unless there's a quick shift in philosophy for whatever reason. I'll just say this. I don't love it, but, it's the strategy, whether I like it or not. So we'll have more to say on that. And then Sean has got some quotes from Trey Taylor on the board already. He'll have a show out, or an article out later today on that as well. So overall, Sean, great first week of recruiting from this new staff. You knock out just crushed it on the pot of gold. You follow that up with the recruiting weekend they had. I know it didn't manifest in any public commitments, and that's what people ultimately evaluate. The success comes from that, and ultimately the success doesn't even come from that. It comes from who signs in December and February. But great first great first impression for me, Sean, with this new staff, with how they did the pot of gold, and then how they've handled this first week of visits, and then, of course, the impressive list of people that are coming over this next month. So far, so good for this new look Notre Dame recruiting staff.
I think what is encouraging about everything that's taken place, especially with the changes that have taken place and the new additions to the staff and the coaching staff, is that there has been a clear sign. Regardless of what others might say, there is a clear sign that there's one guy at the head of this, and it's his vision. And that's a beautiful thing to know. It is Marcus Freeman. And just a tidbit with David Robinson, he was like, I couldn't believe it. I'm standing on the sideline in the middle of practice, and I'm watching practice, and I was talking to somebody, and I looked up, and Marcus Freeman was right in front of me and stood there and talked to me while practice was going on for like the next 5 minutes. It knew exactly who I was and made me feel like, man, I was high priority. So it's that type of attention to detail that Notre Dame is taking to heart and executed flawlessly over this past weekend. So you love to hear that. It is Marcus Freeman's vision, and other people are able to come in and execute his vision. That is what is so beautiful about what took place. Despite all of the, I don't want to say mishaps, but just say the hurdles that were thrown in front of Notre Dame with departures and not getting the first guy in their search for general manager, ultimately getting Mike Martin, and then ultimately getting Jordan Blake in. You talked about the impact of him coming in, how much can he really add? Carter Allman doing an incredible job. You can give direct tribute to Carter Allman for Notre Dame getting Trey Taylor back to South Bend for his visit. He was the one. He was the one that went to Chicago in February and got him to lock back in with Notre Dame and come in for this unofficial visit. So Carter Allman's done an incredible job. Congratulations on his elevation, director of recruiting. So Notre Dame fans should be happy. You lost Chad Bowden, but what has taken place is that you've seen there is one clear vision, and the Notre Dame way is still working with or without the people that are no longer there. It's just set in stone, and they keep building. They keep building and getting better. And you're watching a transition, Brian. Like you said, we're watching a transition where they're becoming bolder in their evaluations, bolder in the kids that they go after, and then they're executing at a much better rate when these kids come on campus. And I think that's fabulous and speaks well to the future of the program.
So, Sean, that's going to be part one of today's show, the recruiting roundup. Obviously, as I said, I had four intel pieces up. Sean, you had about 4 or 5 as well, which is some different quotes from different players, some quick nuggets for people. So, again, this is a reason you want to be on the premium board. A lot of stuff that we talked about, there's a lot more to it that we put on the board, including the specifics of what worked for Rodney Dunham so much on his visit. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Definitely check that out. I did put a link in the show to that intel piece for Rodney Dunham. We had several others from this weekend. So even some of the stuff that we're giving you now, you'd have known days ago on the premium board if you were part of that. And then we'll have obviously more coming up here. So you definitely want to make sure that you've signed up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Everybody in the chat who's on the boards will tell you this is a great product, not just because of what we do, but a lot of it is because of the type of community we've built. No community is perfect, but it's a really awesome community. We're talking ball. There's a conversation going on right now about how you would rank the 4 quarterbacks between Riley Leonard, Ian Book, Jack Cohn, and Sam Hartman. We're having a conversation of what you would think the odds are right now of who starts a quarterback. And then, of course, all the intel. A lot of conversation going on about the next topic that we are going to talk about that I'm going to get to here in a second that I also posted on the board. So, folks, before we get to part 2, also do us a little favor. So a little thumbs up, little button underneath you, that like button. Make sure you hit that once. If you've already hit it before, don't hit it now because then it'll unlike it. Just hit that sucker once. It'll light up. and then you've hit that. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. If you're listening via podcast platform, we would love it if you would give us a 5-star review. It's one of those things that really helps our site grow. These are things that y'all can do for us that are free, that just take seconds to do, that really helps us grow the channel, helps us promote the channel, and is a way that you can show your support for what we're doing at Irish Breakdown. We really appreciate that. So, Sean, let's get to part 2 of today's show, and that is going to be looking at this Notre Dame offense as it heads into year 2 and what we think, what expectations should be for this Notre Dame offense going into year 2. And there's a lot of things that go into it. I mean, who's the new quarterback going to be? What's the offensive line going to look like? Who steps up a receiver? How will the new guys at receiver look? Can the running back room kind of build on what they did in year 2? Who's going to the tight end going to be? I mean, you're going to have not only a new starter, but whoever your new starter is going to be a very different quarterback than style of play wise than the kid you had last year. I would argue that there's better defenses on the schedule this year than there was last year. There's a lot of things that kind of go into it about, how they can do in year 2. But Sean, when I look at this conversation, I have a lot more optimism than maybe most when you ask the question, can Notre Dame, a team that went 14-2 and made it all the way to the college football national championship game, can that team be better on offense in year 2? Can they improve their passing game, which is the area that needs the biggest jump? Can they become more efficient in the running game? Like the run game numbers look great, 200 yards a game, over 6 yards a carry. But a lot of that was built on 90-yard touchdowns, 70-yard touchdowns, 60-yard touchdowns that really made this an incredibly gifted and explosive running back room, a running back room that can certainly put the highlight reels together, but can they be efficient? We talked about, even Jeremiah Love was talking about that in his press conference the other day, about how he's trying to be I don't think he word to use the efficient, but just a more sound player that can do the little things a bit better. Can they do that with a first-year starting quarterback? And the thing that I like, Sean, is like, okay, we can give our opinion about whatever reason, but the question is, do they have a coaching staff in place that knows how to lead this type of offense to better heights? And so what that led me to do last week was start to look at the numbers and start to study. What has Mike Denbrock done in year 2? Because I can tell you all I want, Sean, that here's why I think they're going to be better. But if they don't have the people in place to lead them to that success, then it's not going to happen. And so what I want to focus on here is, let's look at Denbrock's history. Let's talk about why it may be the way that it is, and then how this applies to the Notre Dame team when you go into 2022 or 2025. And so what we did is we went back and looked at year 1. So this is Mike Denbrock's 4th offensive coordinator job. It's a repeat of his first, so it's different. It counts as 4. He was Notre Dame offensive coordinator from 2014 to 2016. He was the Cincinnati offensive coordinator from 2017 to 2021. And he was the offensive coordinator at LSU in 22 and 23. So, and now he's obviously was at Notre Dame 24, and we're going into year 2. So the conversation that we had, or the data that we wanted to look up, is how did these Mike Denbrock offenses do in year 2? And so we pulled up the numbers. And my gut, feeling of like, okay, having followed obviously Notre Dame, but then other teams, was I feel like they get better, but how much better? So we pulled up the numbers, Sean, and what the numbers showed us, and we're going to pull them up here in a second, is across the board, Mike Denbrock has shown, no matter the circumstance, and we'll get into this, in the second year of the Mike Denbrock offense, you're going to score more points, you're going to go for more yards, and you're going to go for more yards per play. And every single season, we have seen that no matter the circumstance. And that big picture should give Notre Dame fans a lot of reason for optimism about his ability to grow. And when you look at the specifics of it, Sean, you start getting real fired up about what they can do.
Oh, I was waiting for you to put. I thought you were about to put the graphic up. That's why.
No. I'm bringing it up while you start to talk.
Okay, but no, I think what we see before is you talked about the improvement in year 2. On average, we're talking about 9 points per game improvement offensively in the second year, and then a ranking improvement of 38 spots per year, looking at these graphics. So, it's pretty safe to assume. The only difference is at LSU and Cincinnati, he had a returning quarterback for a second year as well. No, I think LSU was returning
only
quarterback.
LSU.
Cincinnati,
only
you're right.
LSU. They went from Hayden Moore to Desmond Ritter in year one.
Desmond Ritter, right. So you lean more on the Cincinnati experience than having a guy that will eventually be the Heisman Trophy winner, which was astounding because what we saw from him at Arizona State and his transfer to LSU, even in his first year, towards the end of the year, that led into how he propelled that offense. It led that offense to what is a historical offensive year in LSU. Even going back and looking at what Joe Burrow was able to do in 2019, you have to be impressed with Mike Denbrock being able to be the guy, taking that talent, having Brian Thomas, having Malik Neighbors. Yes, of course, he had elite talent, but he knew how to get the best out of that talent. So you look at the Cincinnati situation, I would venture to say skill-wise, is probably out of all, let's say the LSU situation, the Cincinnati situation of 17 to 18, and the last 2 years of Notre Dame, which would you say is the least talented at the skill position?
Cincinnati.
I would agree. Yeah. And so for him to improve that offense in his second year with Desmond Ritter to 14 points per game, and we're talking about what, 88 spots in national ranking offensively, Mike Denbrock knows what he's doing. The simple fact that in the middle of the season, he was able to redirect the offense last year to be able to win the way Notre Dame had to win shows you that he has the ability to construct a plan, but then adapt when things don't go as is scripted. So that speaks to Mike Denbrock. But now we're coming into a season that's going to be very interesting, just like in Cincinnati, where he has a new quarterback, but those quarterbacks, correct me if I'm wrong, because Desmond Ritter was still there. Even though he was there
in year one. Yeah.
Yes.
Desmond Ritter, right. He did not start as a true freshman.
Right. So that speaks to Cincinnati. His situation now, where these guys, whoever wins is going to be a first-time starter, but they've been in the system with Mike Denbrock for a year. They were there. Right. So you can kind of lean on that to say, this is why you feel like the Notre Dame offense can take a step forward in year two of Mike Denbrock.
Right. You look at these numbers, Sean, and there's a lot of different ways you can spin it. Well, they had Jaden Daniels. Oh, okay, fair. They had Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. They also had Keyshawn Boutte in 2022. Didn't have him in 2023. But the point is okay, so in that scenario, what are we saying? What allowed him with the same exact players to go from 34.5 points per game to 45.5 points per game, from 453 yards per game to 6.4 yards per play, which are both still they were top 30 across the board in those categories, to 543.5 yards per game and then 8.4 yards per play. We had great players. We had great players in year one, too. So what was it about having those great players that allowed them to do that? And that's kind of part of what we're going to discuss, is what allowed them to go to make the jump. And not only that, but then also make a jump from the year before. That's the other thing, too, is it's not like in either of those situations, he walked into great situations where they had proven success. So when you look at LSU in 2021, the year before he arrived, they were scoring 26.5 points per game, and they only had 368.5 yards per game and then 5.4 yards per play. And then you see the jump they made in year one. Now, Notre Dame, they had a much better situation. I would argue Notre Dame was more efficient this year. They didn't have the high numbers of yards per play, yards per game, and then points that they had a year before, played a much different schedule. Their points per game and their yards were almost identical to the year before prior to the playoffs when they played four great defenses, or the year before they had one postseason game against the depleted Oregon State team. So you got to look at the context of those numbers. But you look at at the way he did it there. Okay, well, he doesn't have Jaden Daniels at Notre Dame. He doesn't have a returning starter at Notre Dame this time. Okay, well, let's look at his Cincinnati job. They were going from a team that the year before Mike Denbrock arrived at Cincinnati, that was a team that really struggled on offense. They were averaging 19.3 points per game, and then they were averaging 374.1 yards per game. So they saw a slight up in scoring. You went down a little bit in yards, but you went up in yards per play. They were at 5.3. Actually, no, they went slightly down in that regard, 5.3. And then they get a new quarterback, go out in 2018 and make huge jumps in 2018. 14-point improvement. As you said, 88 spot ranking jump. You see a 106.7 yards per game jump and a 0.9 yards per play jump at Cincinnati. Then you look at Notre Dame. That's where they had the least improvement. They had a 4-point improvement in points, which is 1.4 average. They had a 21.5 per game average in yards per play, which was a 5-spot ranking. But then they had a big jump in yards per play, went from 6.1 to 7, and that jumped them from 32 to 6. A couple things about that Notre Dame improvement, which I think adds a lot of context and actually makes that one of his more impressive jobs, is from 2014 to 2015, you had a new quarterback, you had a new run, so that was something that was going to happen. Everett was being replaced by Malik Zaire. But before the second game of the year was done, Sean, Notre Dame had lost their starting quarterback to a season-ending injury. They lost their starting running back on his third carry of the season, and they had lost their starting tight end and spent the rest of the year with a freshman as the primary tight end. And then in the last 4 games of the regular season, their starting running back also, their next running back got hurt, and they finished the year out with a true freshman at running back in Josh Adams, and then Dexter Williams were the running back. So, you look at that team, things did not go well. You lost your starting quarterback. You lost your starting running back. You lost your starting tight end, all before the second game of the year was over. You look at what that offense looked like in the one game where they were healthy from start to finish, and they annihilated Texas in that first game, Sean. I mean, absolutely destroyed Texas in that first game. Still one of the best just single game offensive performances we've seen from a quarterback, just in all the metrics that you look at. Malik Zaire goes, I think, what was it, 8? I'm pulling up now, 18 of 21, and that 19 of 22 for 313 yards and 3 touchdowns. They ran for 214 yards. CJ Prosise, who had played receiver the year before, comes off the bench after Torian Folsom gets hurt. Him and Josh Adams combined for 147 yards on 25 carries and 2 touchdowns in that game. Will Fuller has a big game. Chris Brown you had 5 different guys catch at least 2 passes. 5 different guys have at least 31 yards receiving that game. And you annihilate Texas and only score 7 points in the second half. You were on the verge of absolutely rolling Virginia. So on the play after Malik got hurt, they scored to go up 26-14. Virginia started their comeback after that. And then, of course, Notre Dame held on to win. So when you look at that, they were on the verge. That offense was on the verge of being way more dynamic than what it even turned out to be. But even with all of that, you still saw improvement in year 2 with all those injuries with the new quarterback. So no matter the circumstances, and Cincinnati and Notre Dame, this is important context for Notre Dame. Each scenario, the starting quarterback for the all season, with the exception of Malik Zaire starting the first 2 games, but for the final 11 games, and for all of 2018 at Cincinnati, the starting quarterback was a redshirt freshman. Why does that matter? Because redshirt freshmen back then could not play at all in the season before. So, yes, you could say, well, he did this and that. But even with Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, they still saw a 10-point per game average with the same exact players. It's just talent isn't the reason that that's happening. It's you put that talent in position to be successful. Desmond Ridder is a more talented quarterback than Hayden Moore was. And so once you got the talent, you were able to put it in position to be more successful. 14-point per game average, over 100-yard per game average, 0.9 yards per play improvement. You had at least a 0.9 yards per play improvement at every school he has been. Think about what that's going to mean for Notre Dame if that trend continues, because all we know about Mike Denbrock is wherever he's been in year 2, they have a 0.9 yards per play average. So that means Notre Dame is going to do what next year? At least 7.2, because the baseline is 6.3. So and that's the thing I look at, Sean, and you start getting kind of excited about is there's every school that he's been at has had different circumstances he's had to navigate through in order to have the success that they had. 2017 to 2018 at Cincinnati, they have a completely different run game. And like, so this is like the overall stats, but let's get a little bit deeper, Sean. Let's look at the run game stats. At least a 20 per. This is where you saw the most consistency. At least a 20 yards per game improvement everywhere. 21.8 at LSU with a 1.2 per play increase. You saw a over 100-yard rushing improvement at Cincinnati, jumped 85 spots, 0.8 yards per play better rushing. You see at Notre Dame, they had almost 50-yard improvement and a 1.3 yard per carry improvement for Notre Dame rushing the football. What you're also going to see at the end of the Notre Dame one is that's the one statistic where Notre Dame regressed, and a meaningful statistic was third down success, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that they didn't have they were the youth at quarterback created a lot of issues that year with Deshaun. So you see improvement in the run game, including one place that was already good at running the ball in LSU, that's the situation that's more in context with Notre Dame. The other two places they weren't good at running the ball when he got there. The year before, and this is a great statistic because everybody will say, well, Mike Denbrock loves to throw the football. And I'm sure Mike Denbrock does love to throw the football. The year before Mike Denbrock got to Cincinnati, the Bearcats averaged 118.2 yards per game rushing and 3.6 yards per carry. By his second season, they had jumped all the way up to 239.5, which is double what they were doing the year before he got there. And they went from 3.6 yards per play carry to 5.2. That's a very impressive statistic, Sean. And then then let's go to the pass game. Improvement everywhere in the pass game. Now you say, well, they didn't improve in yards per game at Notre Dame. They weren't trying to throw for as many yards. But let's also remember that in the one game they had their starting quarterback from start to finish, they passed for 313 yards. But even though they went down in yards at Notre Dame, Sean, they went way up in yards per attempt. They also went over 10, almost 10 points higher in yards per or in efficiency, and they were also made a big jump in yards per catch. They were, I think, 13.4, and they jumped up to 14 in his second year in that offense. At LSU, we saw them go from 269.3 passing yards per game to 338.9 with the same exact players. 7.9 yards per attempt to 10.7 yards per attempt. And the Cincinnati success is fascinating because even though they had a 103.8 yards per game jump in rushing, they still went up almost 3 yards in passing, but they had a big jump in yards per attempt, 6.0 to 7.6, and they made about a 23-point jump in passing efficiency. They also went up in yards per catch that second year in Cincinnati as well. So the yards don't matter as much to me, Sean, as the numbers that supplement the yards per attempt, yards per completion, efficiency. They also went up in completion percentage in every single spot, which is fascinating when you consider that Malik Zaire and Deshaun Kaiser completed passes at a higher rate than Everett Golson did in that second year under Mike Denbrock. I think that's something to point out as well. That just leads to, and then the fact that this is a team that in every discernible manner, except for one spot where they went down in third down, they improved across the board in every significant statistic that you can point to, with the exception of two: third down, and then red zone percentage in Notre Dame in 2015 as well, because if you remember, Deshaun had a lot of red zone picks that year. But interception rate went down. All of it went down in year 2 under Mike Denbrock, no matter the circumstances, the specifics, the context of wherever he's been, they're all different. Sometimes you had returning starters, sometimes you didn't. All that stuff, and you saw the same thing happen everywhere. Improvement, 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 improvement. So what makes me think that they won't do the same thing at Notre Dame in year 2 under Mike Denbrock, especially, Sean, since we started to see it happen at Notre Dame. They averaged 31 points per game in the first 4 games of the year. Offensive points, not team points, offensive points. Coming out of the bye, the last 8 games of the regular season, when they started to alter kind of the offense a little bit to fit the personnel, 39 points per game in the final 8 regular season games. Offensive points, not team, offensive points. And it just speaks volumes to one thing we know for a fact that Mike Denbrock knows how to do, Sean. Have his second-year offense be better than his first-year offense.
And I think it speaks to what you talked about. It's going to be a more efficient offense. And what do we mean by that? More than likely, it's going to be a more explosive offense. So I want to look at the numbers you put up when it talked about total yards per game. There were gains in the second year. At LSU, 90 yards per game led to 10 more points per game. Cincinnati, 100 yards per game led to 14 more points per game. And then the smallest connection to this is Notre Dame, where 22 more yards per game only led to 2 points per game, close to 2 points per game. So what does this mean?
It's about on average.
What does it mean? You put all of this into the calculator, and it means that Notre Dame can expect, or under Mike Denbrock, he has shown in his second year that his offenses, all it takes is 7.38 yards improvement to add 1 point to the point per game average. If Notre Dame gets 7 more yards per game, that's an extra point. That's what it averages out to between his 3 teams in that second year and the difference. So now what are we talking about? So if Notre Dame improves 50 yards per game, say 50 yards per game, that's 7 points, or close to 7 points per game. If you add 50 yards per game, that's close to 7 points per game based upon what Mike Denbrock has done by the numbers. So, you might think this explosion is going to be a bunch of extra yardage. No, man, it's the efficiency that you see in the second year that's going to lead to the points really jumping up. Not the just big jump in yardage, but the efficiency based upon the averages of his numbers that equals 1 point equals 7.38 yards when it comes to improvement in efficiency in the Mike Denbrock offense in the second year. And I think something else you pointed to that would lend itself to the explosion or the explosiveness of the offense. You talked about 2015. They're clicking on all cylinders against Texas. They go on the road. They're struggling early, and then all of a sudden they hit turbo. And next thing you know, they just fly past. They're about to blow Virginia out the water.
Malik hits that bomb over the top to Will Fuller, and then Malik goes on the long run. Right.
Malik gets hurt as they're entering the red zone to put more points on the board. And I think, I'm not mistaken, they ended up missing the field goal.
No. They scored on the very next play. They handed the ball off to CJ, and he ran it in for a touchdown.
They ran it for a touchdown. They go up. If they get the ball back,
it's 26-14.
They're hot now. Malik's probably going to lead them right back down the field because now he has a rhythm. He was out of rhythm early in the game. And so, that offense was going to be explosive. It was going to be an offense like you can hold us down early. You might be able to keep us in check. But once we get in rhythm, we're going to put up points in bunches. Yeah. And that's exactly what I would expect this offense to do and improve in the second year.
Yeah. I love what you're saying there, Sean, because I don't believe that year 2 gets better just because you're more explosive. I think year 2, you become more explosive because you become more efficient. And that's really what it comes down to. I got some more numbers for you that I didn't put into the breakdown. I don't have the Notre Dame numbers because CFB Stats doesn't go back to 14 and 15, so I can only look at Cincinnati and LSU. In 2017, in year 1 at Cincinnati had 17 plays of 30 yards or more, 17. In year 2, that jumped to 45. In year 1 at LSU, they had 30 plays in 14 games of 30 yards or more. And in year 2, in one fewer game, they had 54. Same players. If you look at Notre Dame this year, when you look at 30-yard gains for Notre Dame this year, in 16 games, Notre Dame this season, Sean, had 34 plays of 30 yards or more in 16 games. If you look at that and put it on a per-game basis and give them the same number of games they had at LSU, which is 14, they'd be at 30. Same exact number. But there's one difference between 2022 since LSU is the clock rules that limit snap opportunities. So when you already think about this Notre Dame team is they're already explosive, much more explosive than that Cincinnati team. Very similar to how LSU was in 2022, because the one thing about LSU in 2022 is they could rip off some big plays now. I mean, that wasn't a concern for LSU in 2022. I mean, they were a top, a team that was pretty good at ripping off big plays. Notre Dame does that because of their run game. That was primarily driven by their run game, where those other teams was a little bit more balanced. And at Cincinnati, it was driven by their pass game because they were pretty terrible running the football. So Notre Dame is on par with what LSU was. Now you expect there to be more explosiveness, but I believe that explosiveness leads to efficiency leads to more explosiveness. I don't think explosiveness leads to efficiency. You can be efficient and explosive. If you are efficient, you're most likely going to be more explosive. But you can be explosive and not efficient, and that's what Notre Dame was this year. They were not an efficient offense. And so you ask, why do you think Notre Dame get better in year two? And that's kind of where we're going to go with this next part of the conversation, Sean, as we kind of wrap this topic up, is so, okay, that's great. Those numbers are great. But why? Why is Mike Denbrock able to have that success? And there's a couple facets to it. Number one is the players know the system better. Like, they know the offense better. They know what to do. That's why you started to see improvement from this team late in the year. I mean, think about this. The offense against Indiana, Georgia, Penn State, and Ohio State looked better than it did against Texas A&M, Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, and Louisville. I take the Purdue game out because that team was just terrible. But the offense looked better in those games than it did in the first four games, even though the competition was significantly tougher. Why? Better feel for the position. Better feel for what they're being asked to do technically, fundamentally. In year one, you're laying a foundation schematically. In year two, you're building on that. In year one, you have to teach how to play the game just as much as you got to teach them what they're supposed to do, if not more so. In year two, a lot of that technical foundation is laid. You're going to enhance it. But now it's like, okay, we know that. Now let's go here. Well, okay, but you're going to have a new quarterback. You're going to have some new receivers. Okay, counters to that. Number one is one of the receivers that is new played for Mike Brown and Mike Denbrock in 2017. Or 2021, excuse me. So they know what the expectations are. The other receiver is walking into a situation that's very different than the one that Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell and Jaden Harrison walked into. Whereas when those cats showed up at Notre Dame last year, hey, man, what am I supposed to do? I don't know. I've never played for these guys before. Now, Malachi Field shows up this summer. Hey, man, what am I supposed to do? Jaden Greathouse can talk to him. Micah Gilbert can talk to him. Jordan Faison can talk to him. And Will Paulding can talk to him. KK Smith can talk to him and lead them. Now, your first-year starting quarterback doesn't always have to have the answers because his offensive line knows what they're doing. The running back can say, hey, there may be times this year where the quarterback makes a check and Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price looks at him and goes, we're supposed to check to this because now they know. And so those are all things that are going to aid the offense. So much more attention to detail. Last year's team, Sean, on offense got by on good scheme and just every single Saturday until I would argue the last game of the season. I would argue up until that point, Notre Dame's dudes were always better than the dudes they were going up against on defense in every situation. That includes Texas A&M. That includes Georgia. That includes Penn State. And that includes Indiana. Their dudes. There was nobody on the other team that could hang with the running backs. And if you could put all your attention on stopping the running backs, like Georgia did, then you leave yourself vulnerable to Riley Leonard going off. And reverses are now working. and jet sweeps are working, and so that's what made this team so good. Now you give this team that's going to be just as talented, if not more so, because yes, you lose a lot with Riley leaving as a runner and a playmaker. You lose a lot, but you're going to be better throwing the football this year. I don't care who starts a quarterback. You're going to be more dynamic at receiver this year because your young guys have more experience. And I would argue strongly that a combination of Malachi Fields and Will Pauling is better than Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell. That's not to mean they're not good players. It's just better. Your running backs are going to be even better. Your offensive line that was super inexperienced last year, way more experienced this year. So your ability to pay attention to detail and build on the foundation that you established in year one is a big reason why Mike Denbrock was able to have success. And here's the final piece, Sean. We focus a lot on players got to learn the new coach. They got to learn the new system. Well, here's the final piece to the puzzle. Mike Denbrock now has a full year, and he'll have a year and a half by the time we get to the fall, of learning the strengths and weaknesses of his players. Why did he change the pass game coming out of the bye week? Because now he had 2 months of data of Riley Leonard, of what he was and wasn't good at in practice, and he had 4 games of data at what Riley did or didn't read well. Now, Riley's always, hey, coach, I love it. I can do this. But now you know what he does and doesn't read well, and you can alter what you're doing. He now knows his players better. And that always takes a while to learn. I now have a better sense of as a coach of what Jeremiah Love is good at, which means I know how to build around him, but I also know areas where I can get him to improve. I know what I got in Jadarian Price, and I know how to use him, but let's also work on improving him in these other ways. I know what worked for us with Jaden Greathouse and what didn't. I know what worked for us with Jordan Faison and what didn't. I know, as the position coach, what Eli Raridan is good at and what he isn't good at. And Mike Denbrock is one of those coaches, and I've told this story about Clark Lee, Sean. Clark Lee I was talking to Clark Lee one time, and he looks at it and he says, hey, listen, I was in a meeting one time, and he says, and we're sitting there, we're going through the players on the board. We're talking about, this kid and that kid and all these other things. And they're talking about what they do well and what they don't do well. And there's all these different things. And he said, I just stopped the meeting in a second. He goes, hey guys, hold on a second. Stop telling me what they don't do well and tell me what they do well. I don't care what they don't do well. I need to know what they do well. And I thought that was something where you're like, now that's a football coach. I know Mike Denbrock is like that. He was like that last time, and he was like that this year. Stop telling me what Riley Leonard can't do. Let's figure out what he's great at, and we're going to build the offense around that. And that's what we saw him do coming out of the Louisville game, because he now had an idea of, now you have evidence of what Riley is or isn't good at. He reads this play great in practice. He can't read it worth a darn in games. But, and so I'm going to stop calling it because he's not good at it, but he's really good at this. That's what good coaches do. And that's what we're going to see from Mike Denbrock in year 2. And why I say that, and I don't say why I think, I say we're going to see it because he did it at Notre Dame in 15. He did it at Cincinnati in 18. He did it at LSU in 23. You have no evidence to tell me I'm wrong. I have tons of evidence to tell me that I'm right. And that is that when Mike Denbrock and when his players have a better sense of what he's doing and he has a better sense of what they're doing and they can build on the foundation they laid in year 1, you see a significant improvement in performance by his offense across the board. And that's why I'm excited. And that's how it works, Sean. That's why it gets better. Is that right there?
And the fact that he just has some really talented players. He's had some talented players. Yeah, you 2 wide receivers he had, and what Michael Young in Notre Dame transfer was in the slot form. I forget the local kid here out of Chicago that's in the NFL with the Colts right now.
Was it Taylor or was it Scott?
Scott was a freshman. I think Scott was a freshman at that point in time. Talking about the big kid. He's a Chicago kid. He's like 6'3". I forget his name. Someone, hopefully the chat can hit us up and let us know.
You talking about Tyler Scott?
No, Tyler Scott
Or are you talking
wasn't.
about Alec Pierce?
Alec Pierce. Yeah, Tyler Scott was the
He was
young
from, okay.
was the young guy
I didn't know Alec
at
Pierce was
that
from
point
the
in time.
Chicago area. I didn't
Yeah,
know
he's
that.
from the Chicago area. Yeah, so even looking at those skill position guys that he had, they
He didn't have any
pretty.
of those guys. Here's the thing, Sean. He didn't have any of those guys in 2018. I mean, those guys were all 20 and 21. Like if you look at his 2000, you look at his 18 offense. Yeah, any of those guys. His leading receiver with 56 catches, 782 yards, and 9 touchdowns in year 2 at Cincinnati was Khalil Lewis. You ever heard of Khalil Lewis? Neither is anybody else in the chat. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing is he didn't even have the talent level he had in 19 and 20 when you started to see Alec Pierce come out in 19. You saw Josh Wiley, Michael Young, Trey Tucker, Tyler Scott, Leonard Taylor.
That was my point that I was getting ready to get to. Is like, as he got the talent, then you saw what he was able to do, because talent always makes coaching look better. Like great coaching is great coaching, but you put great coaching with great talent, it's just a natural and organic connection and relationship. And so now, as much, that's why you love hearing, and I don't want to get into like tidbits and everything, but you love some of the things that you're hearing coming out of practice be about certain guys, especially in the wide receiver room. It's like, okay, what will eventually be in the room once we get into the fall. If we're hearing things about this group of guys, then you really start to feel like, okay, he really has the requisite pieces, because we already know what the running back room is like. We pray that injury stays away from the tight end room, because if there are no injuries, the tight end room is going to be productive. And then we expect the offensive line, just being healthier, to be better, because there's plenty of talent there. Notre Dame is a more talented and deeper roster. That by itself is going to lend itself to Notre Dame progressing offensively. So, you put that connected to what we just pointed out with everything connected to Mike Denbrock's offense in the second year and what is shown and what it has historically done. That's why you absolutely, like, all of the evidence. We could talk about theories. We could talk about ND PTSD with offense and quarterbacks and all of this other stuff. Let the record show that the guy that's going to be calling the plays has a history of his offense vastly improving in year 2.
Different groups.
Yes.
And very different circumstances. You can't say, well, he's like you, and I knew what you meant to say early on. It's like, okay, you're going into year 2 of Everett Golson in 2015. You're going into year 2 of whoever at Cincinnati, and you're going into year 2 of Jayden Daniels at LSU. Well, you can't. It's hard to compare those because you're going into year 1 of whoever the quarterback's going to be in Notre Dame. Cool, fair. But that wasn't the circumstance of 2 of his last 3 schools. They did have new guys at positions. They did have new running backs or new. I mean, yes, Notre Dame had a new receiver in Will Fuller in 15, but let's not forget Mike Denbrock is the guy that oversaw him going from 6 catches as a freshman as his position coach to 70 catches and 1,000 yards as a sophomore. Because remember, Mike Denbrock was on staff at Notre Dame prior to 2014. So he was still Will Fuller's position coach. And then you see that big jump that he had. So no matter how you spin it, he's played a huge role in that. I had all that talent at LSU. Yeah, they had that talent in 2023 as well, or 22 as well. And a lot of that talent they also had in 2021, with the exception of Jayden Daniels, number 1. Number 2, nobody thought Jayden Daniels 23 was who Jayden Daniels was prior to 2023. We can all look back now and be like, hey, man, you had Jayden Daniels that year. But who thought Jayden Daniels was going to do that going into that season? Let's be honest, LSU fans. A lot of y'all wanted Garrett Nussmeier to start in 2023. Let's be real about that. There was a loud contingent of LSU fans that thought that Garrett Nussmeier was going to push Jayden Daniels for the starting quarterback job, and some people wanted it.
You remember the buzz after that SEC championship loss? You remember when Garrett Nussmeier came in, put up some touchdowns? Yeah, see, don't run from it. Don't run from it. That buzz was there. That buzz was there.
Well, yeah, he did well because you had Jayden Daniels. Y'all didn't think that going into the season. Let's be honest about that. So who gets credit for that? The guy running the offense gets some. Now, the other thing I like too, Sean, is this isn't just Denbrock with a new staff. He, in that turnaround in 2006, 17 to 18, I believe Gino Guidugli was with him on that staff as well. I believe. But more importantly, Gino's first year at Cincinnati was 2017. So 2018, he moved to quarterbacks. But my point is, two of the coaches he's working with now, he's worked with before. They coached with him. So like Mike Brown knows what Mike Denbrock wants. They coach together. Gino Guidugli knows what Mike Denbrock wants. They've coached together. And the fact that you only have one coach leaving from last year's staff, I think that overall staff continuity leads to it for me as well, Sean, that it's not just Mike Denbrock's responsibility. It's now year 3 of Joe Rudolph. It's now year 2 of Mike Brown. It's now year 3 of Gino Guidugli. It's now year 2 of Mike Denbrock. And the only addition is at running back is I think one of the easier positions to make a fast transition as a coach, for being honest. And number 2, you replaced a great coach with another great coach. You lost a great coach and you replaced him with a great coach. So I think it's just the staff around him gives me confidence that you're not teaching new technique to your offensive linemen because you have a new offensive line coach. You're not teaching new route technique because you have a new receivers coach. It's all going to be, let's keep building, let's keep growing. And I think that's a big part of what kind of goes into this as well, which leads to that excitement, which means, Sean, as we said, you want to know why I'm excited about this offense going into year 3 or year 2 of Mike Denbrock? It's because of that. It's because of not only the talent that Notre Dame returns, but the success that Mike Denbrock has had getting this type of jump in year 2. And so that's why I think a lot now, the only question for me now, Sean, is how big of a jump will it be? That's going to be the question.
That goes back to the numbers that I presented with the efficiency, right? I think we go back to his second year. The biggest jump, if I'm not mistaken from the numbers you put out, there were bigger jumps in the individual run game numbers. And that might just be based upon where Cincinnati, if you average it out, the Cincinnati might skew that a little bit versus, and the LSU situation might skew that a little bit. But I think there's a considerable more increase in yards per game in the run game than in the pass game. Yeah. If I saw that correctly.
Yeah, because Cincinnati actually, so it actually kind of balances out pass game wise, Sean, because you had LSU made a, what'd that be, 68.6 or 69.6 improvement at LSU in yards, but you went down 20, what would that be, 27 or so, around 27 for Notre Dame, and then you only had a 2.6 improvement at Cincinnati. That's what say the yards per play average works. The run game is where you had consistent good jumps everywhere.
Right. So now, that for me lets you know at the core, because we could sit up here and look at Jaden Daniel and look at the improvement of Desmond Ridder. We could talk about the early returns on the quarterbacks that he had while he was at Notre Dame. But the truth of the matter is, at the heart of the matter, this man wants to run the ball. Like he wants to run the
balanced.
Ball. Yes,
that's
he wants
the thing,
to be
Sean.
balanced.
He wants to be balanced. Right. And that's what you
so
see.
That now you understand where the efficiency comes from, because improving run game definitely impacts efficiency and the passing plays. And when you call them, you've been a play caller, B. When you call it, why you call it. You pointed out, man, we talk about this story all the time. You guys are in the playoff game. You went to the coach and was like, yo, we need to call this play, right? And it went for a touchdown. Like, when you're an efficient offense, it helps so much with the feel of the game.
Right.
Week to week, and knowing when to call something. What's the right time? Because when you call it, you want it to go. Every play is called to go for a touchdown. That's one thing I learned. Every play in the playbook is called to go, hey, we run this right, we should score, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that, but most play callers, that's their mindset. So now when you make these calls in the passing game, coming off a very effective run game, you get the big plays, especially if you have the talent that can add run after catch like he had at LSU. That's what he had at LSU. He had the ability to call plays, and then he had the talent to take the play call and turn it from being a 5-yard game, 10-yard game into 30, 40, 50, things of that nature. So all things work together, and I think that's what we're going to see. That's why it's going to happen.
Well, it's like you talk about play calling, and I remember a circumstance in my coaching career, and I believe I've shared this story before, but when I was at Duquesne, we were on the road playing a team. We had a big lead, hit some big plays. They were coming back, and we needed a score. We needed a touchdown to put the game away, and we're 3rd and goal at about the 6-yard line, and so we call timeout. And when our head coach would kind of get in these big play situations, he would ask us all during the timeout, "What do you guys want to do here?" He'd always start the O-line coach, then go to the quarterback's coach, get to the running back's coach, and he'd always ask me last. And so we're in this 3rd and goal. It's a 6-yard line. I think it's a 6. And he asked the O-line, he's like, I think we need to throw a fade to Michael Warfield, who's our stud receiver. And then our quarterback's coach, who would always agree with whatever the O-line coach said, the running back coach said the same thing. He said, "What about you, Driscoll?" So we need to run a draw to Mike Hilliard, our running back. He goes, "Why?" I said, "Because everybody in the stadium thinks we're going to throw a fade route to Michael Warfield. So they're gonna think that too." And we called a draw and we walked in. But like that only worked because we could also block well up front in the run game. Because I had a running back that I knew we get him the ball, he can score too. Now I'm the receivers coach. Of course I would want to throw a fade to Michael, but I'm trying to win a football game here. But you can't do that if you're like, but my running back runs a 4.7 and my line can't block, their grandmothers. So we can't do that. That's where that balance piece comes into play. And that's what ultimately Mike Denbrock wants. And I think this team's going to have a better shot. And I want to point something out. Our resident LSU fan said, well, people didn't think that Joe Burrow was going to be good in year 2 either. I mean, just point something out real quick. First of all, nobody saw the jump that Joe Burrow made in year 2. But there's one person in this show for sure that absolutely had Joe Burrow breaking out in year 2 who picked LSU to be in the college football playoff in 2019. So I did see that coming. I did not see Jaden Daniels having a breakout year in year 2. I did not call that one. And that's a huge credit to Jaden, who's now built on that and had a great year as a rookie in the NFL. But, that's what I'm saying is like every situation's different. You could see the LSU offense in 19 was held back by coaching, and the Joe Brady hire was going to turn it loose. That wasn't the case with what Denbrock stepped into. And so that's the point. And as I said, nobody saw the type of breakout Joe Burrow had. Nobody saw that. What I'm saying is I absolutely saw Joe Burrow making a big jump, which was going to make that LSU team really, really good. I didn't see them winning the title. I didn't see him having the monster numbers he had. But you could see the tools were there. And then it got developed. But that's what good coaching does, Sean. Right? It is Joe Burrow didn't just all by himself go from what he did in year 1 to year 2 at LSU. Same with Jaden Daniels. Those guys all had to work as players, but they had to be put in position from a coaching standpoint to get to that point, and that's what has me excited. I think the talent all around is going to be better. I think they're going to be going to a system that they know better, and you have a coach and a coaching staff, for the most part, that have a long track record, especially the offensive coordinator, of taking year 1 to year 2 and getting that group to play at a higher level. And that's what has me excited. We're going to go into part 3 here in a minute. But before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via podcast platform. But as always, Sean, the best way to stay in touch with what we're doing at Irish Breakdown remains signing up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Insured by Big, my guy, the LSU fan, is a member of our premium board. He will post on there. And Archer was on there for a while. So you don't have to be a Notre Dame fan there, but our board is primarily talking about Notre Dame football, but we also talk about college football topics as well. So you want to make sure you sign up for that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Part 3 of today's show, Sean, is the CF part of the RTCF show, recruiting, team, college football. And what Sean and I are going to talk about, and it's a topic that Trevor got to talk with Bill Bender about, but Sean and I felt a little jealous that we weren't on the show talking about the best quarterbacks in the country. So Bill and Trevor did a great job giving their takes on that. And so Sean and I are going to give ours. And so what's fascinating about this, Sean, is you can't, it used to be where hey, who are the top 10 quarterbacks of college football? And we'd have that debate. It's so much different now because of the transfer portal. And the transfer portal has made it to where you almost got to like do sections of what type of quarterback are we talking about because of so much of the uncertainty. So what Sean and I have done is we've put together our lists of the best quarterbacks in college football. And we're doing our top 5. So we're going to each break down our own top 5s. And we're going to start off with just the top 5 returning quarterbacks in college football. So just guys that started last year that are starting again at the school they started at last year. We've got to put that caveat in there because of the transfer portal. Sean will go first, and I'll give my 5. And then part 2 of this segment is going to be who are the top 5 transfer quarterbacks. And we'll add some context. That we're just going to list 5 and like, peace out, everybody. We're going to talk about them. And then part 3 of this segment is going to be who are the top first-year starters, whether it's a transfer who's a first-year starter, a returning player going to his first-year starter, or, in Sean's case, there's a true freshman on there. So who are the guys that are stepping into new starting roles? They could have started a game in place of an injury from time to time. That doesn't count to me. We're talking about guys that go into a season as the guy for the second time. We're going to have that conversation as well. So, Sean, the first segment is about returning starting quarterbacks, and then we'll go to transfers. And I'm going to give a big picture view. Part of the reason that I hope Notre Dame goes into this season thinking we have a shot to win a title again is because the one thing I've noticed is I don't believe this is a great year quarterback amongst the veterans. I think a lot of the best quarterbacks in college football this year are going to be young, just like Notre Dame will. And that somewhat changes the landscape to where a team like a Notre Dame, a team like an Ohio State, like an Oregon, like a Texas, teams that do have first-time starters, talented but first-time starters, are going to be okay because there's not a lot of great veteran quarterbacks, again. And so I think that's a fascinating thing to talk about, Sean. And I was underwhelmed by my list because there isn't that no-brainer that's the best returning quarterback in college football, or this is the top 2 or 3. You and I have very different top 5 lists. And in the past, if I'd had a top 5 list, one of us would have been like, bro, you're out of your mind not having this guy in the top 5 or that. Now it's like, yeah, okay, we have very different top 5s, but all right. So the conversation is going to be interesting, and we purposely didn't talk a lot about it. We just went over what our lists were, and we'll have some of that fun kind of back and forth about it now. So, Sean, we're going to start with you. And we're going to list, we're going to go top 5. Sean cheated a little bit because he couldn't decide who his top 5 was. There was a tie for 5. But we're going to have some fun here, Sean, and we're going to list our top 5 returning starting quarterbacks, guys who started for their teams a year ago. We're going to go 5-1. Mr. Davis, as my beloved guest, you get to kick things off here.
I'm sorry. Man, I keep hitting it. My button keeps clicking on and off. That's why I was trying to wait to see that I would make sure I was clear. All right, let's go.
That happened to me last week, by the way. It was weird.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not just
it kept clicking. So let's start. I had a tie. I did cheat, B. So I want to give, a disclaimer before I get started. This is mine. This is me. It's not about being right, wrong. This is me. These are the 5 guys that I've grown to have an appreciation for. And I can be honest, B, some of these guys I didn't like at all, say a year ago or even a year and a half ago. But for some reason, I've gained a little bit of respect. And I'm looking forward to watching to see if they can take the next step as a returning starter this year in college football. So I'm going to start with my tie. I had a tie at the 5th spot, and I just decided I'm not leaving either one of these kids off. Dylan Raiola out of Nebraska came in with a lot of hype, struggled early on, but actually started off pretty good, then hit a road bump, as most freshmen do at some point. And by the end of the season, you look at him statistically and his efficiency and his high completion percentage, the last 3 games of the season, that team was trending well offensively. Didn't have a ton around him. I'm looking forward to watching Carter Nelson, who is a former Notre Dame targeted tight end, to see how he develops and how he adds to the offense and becomes a security blanket for Dylan Raiola. Their offense is going to be very pro style. So play action, his ability to run, move in the pocket, make plays off schedule, throw from different angles. I think he's going to be a much improved quarterback, and I definitely think he's going to be one of the top quarterbacks to watch in college football that's returning. My next quarterback, Ty, look, before the playoff game against the Ohio State Buckeyes, I can honestly say I might have been a little bit underwhelmed. But there was something about the fight that this young man showed. He was the only offensive player that decided to fight and not tuck tail and run in the playoffs in the horseshoe. We know the talent, big arm, what he showed. I didn't know he could run like that. I didn't know he had the escapability. It was almost like he tried to be this pocket passer for the majority of the season, which is what Josh Heupel had before him. And then when everything was breaking down, just to compete, when you know a guy is a competitor, like he just hit a switch and was like, yo, I'm about to use my legs to get us some points or to get us some yardage, because everybody else seems like they're scared to go out here and fight. I love that from the youngster. Just like Dylan Raiola, he came to Tennessee with a lot of hype. And by the end of the season, I gained a lot of respect for this kid because of the competitor that I saw out of him. And honestly, that's one of the things that I questioned about the kid. Who was he going to be on the inside? And that young man showed me a lot. He showed me that he was a true competitor. Now, fourth place for me is a young man that I saw drastically improve from the early season loss against BYU, which he was absolutely. You bookmarked that BYU game with the Penn State performance in the playoffs. I understand why some people could look at this and say, what? But let me tell you something. His improvement from that game, and you look at what he did leading into that big, ACC championship game and how he brought that team back to tie Clemson. It looked like they were going into overtime, only for Clemson to make that big play and eventually win things. You know, if they win that game in overtime, their playoff experience might be totally different. Who knows? But Kevin Jennings, SMU, he brings a lot of skill position talent back. They have some answers or some questions they need to answer in the trenches on both sides of the ball. But they did very well in the portal. And we'll look and see. Brett Lashley, second year with this kid. We just talked about Mike Denbrock able to have a quarterback in his system for a second year. That's Kevin Jennings coming back for SMU with a lot of talent at the skill position. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this young man can do. Next, number 3. Bam, bring it up. Drew Allen. Let me tell you something. You talk about somebody that I have constantly thrown shots at for the last 2 seasons in college football. I could throw a shot for the decision and the interception he threw that ultimately gave the game to Notre Dame away in the Orange Bowl, but I'm not going to do that. We're talking about a young man that got a little bit of audacity, and I think Penn State benefited from it. Of course, they had an all-world tight end at Tyler Warren that opened up the passing game. You know, the offensive line that comes back pretty much intact, along with those 2 NFL running backs that they have. He was able to put the ball in harm's way. Sometimes you have to take those chances. Even though he had 6 more interceptions than he had the previous season, he was more effective and had a quarterback rating that was higher, because that's the evolution of a quarterback. Of course, you want your quarterback to protect the ball, but sometimes to get those big plays, you have to take chances, and sometimes it doesn't go well for you. I think he had just about the same amount of touchdowns, a little bit more interceptions, because he was willing to throw the ball down the field more last year, which probably led to that interception at the end of the Notre Dame game. They felt confident in what he had shown in other games. A game like USC, where they had to go blow for blow in the passing game. And he was able to do that and lead them to a big time victory on the road. That lends me to believing that the young man can take a step forward. He's shown that he can be a winner. Now can he show he can win the big one against the big time opponents? That's really the only. So I'm waiting. When Oregon comes a calling, Drew Aller, show me that you've taken that next step. That's what I'm looking for. And then show me you can get a big time win in the playoffs. But that's on his head coach as well,
Yeah.
B. James Franklin has to prove some
Let me
things.
give you one statistic to point out what you talked about, Sean. Yes, he threw more picks, but to back up your point, he went from 6.8 yards per attempt in 2023 to 8.4 yards per attempt in 2025 or 24. Excuse me, just to back that up.
And so once again, I see people and talking. I didn't say my list is not about who's better, so there's no need to argue about that. My list is about the top 5 guys that are coming back. That means something to my eyes and what I want to watch.
Basically, who you would want at your quarterback.
Absolutely. These are guys that I'm interested in. Number 2.
He real quick. He is the most polarizing returning quarterback in college football. Drew Aller. Drew Aller.
You think so?
Yeah, because
if he had beaten Notre Dame,
chat. Look at the chat. It's people who think he sucks. He's Bo Nix. Right. He is what we debated about with Bo Nix in 22 and 23. That's what I mean is you have this wide variety of people who really like him, people who really don't like him. There's some people in the middle, and I actually think you and I are both sort of in the middle, but we, leaning towards he's going in the right direction. Yeah, but he's one of those guys that just brings a lot of animosity. I agree. I'm just simply pointing out that he is this year's, to me, most polarizing figure in that. Maybe polarizing is the right word, but it's more so of where you're going to see the biggest difference of opinion and everybody seems to have a Drew Aller opinion, like Bo Nix did. That's the other part.
You're right. Do you think that moment in the Orange Bowl was the opportunity for him to change a lot of minds?
It was. Okay. If he leads them down, or even if they just go to overtime and he wins that game. Yeah. But he struggled in that game overall. Drew didn't play very well in that game.
No.
And that's part of that raising. That's part of kicking that door down is proving that you can play well in those games. And I didn't think he did that in that moment, which is why he's not maybe a little higher on your list.
Number 2 on my board, Cade Klubnik, man. Let me tell you something. Whether it's the Texas game, whether it's the game against SMU in the ACC championship, they got banged up they come in, Louisville bangs them up. And all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, uh-oh, here comes the Clemson slide that has happened the last 2 out of 3 seasons. And this kid, along with his young wide receiving core, just found a way to answer the bell, win another ACC championship, and rise up after getting down early on the road against Texas in a hostile environment. He put that team on his back in the second half because they didn't have a run game. Maffa was injured. It was all Cade Klubnik that made that game any type of game in the fourth quarter at Texas. You have to tip your cap because we saw the year before against Miami on the road, against other teams in fourth quarter situations, he failed miserably. Made horrible decisions. Changed that narrative, in my opinion, last year. Showed me a lot. Showed me he has a lot of intestinal fortitude. Tough kid. The big run to end the game against Pittsburgh. That was unexpected when they were trying to go down and get a field goal. This kid had those moments. I tipped my cap because, like you said, just a year ago, I was like, I don't know about this kid. He might end up being, a bust during his time at Clemson, and this kid once again answered the bell. This is why I love college football, because you get to watch kids struggle, get better, and ultimately overcome. That's what I love about college football. And while I tell people be relaxed when it comes to development of these youngsters, give them time to grow, and eventually, who they are is going to come to the forefront. Sometimes we try to label who they are, like a Drew Aller. He got labeled as this great quarterback with all the hype, and just allow him to be who he is and develop. Yeah. And if it's good enough to win for Penn State, so be it. If Cade Klubnik can lead them to another ACC championship and become a true national title contender or get Clemson back to that level, all of the other talk the previous 3 seasons doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. So Cade Klubnik is 2 for me. He's 2 for me. And number 1 on my list, because I just refuse to have Cade Klubnik at number 1. Number 1 for me, let me tell you something. He is operating in the spirit that might be floating around Tempe. And that is the spirit of Jake the Snake. Because this kid, Sam Levitt, oh man, the audacity that this young man has, the talk that he talked before the Texas game. He was talking that talk, D. He was talking that talk. And I was a little worried about him, like, man, you're not even going to have your best wide receiver. You're talking all this talk, like, I'm going to be the best quarterback on the field. He believed that going into that game. And
but he wasn't.
What? He wasn't, but he came darn close. It wasn't like he was short on effort. This kid, man, let me tell you something. I love quarterbacks like this because he's not the most gifted. He doesn't have the biggest arm, B. But find me somebody on this list that has a bigger heart. And his heart is tremendous. And this is one thing I say, which I can say about Cade Klubnik as well. I've yet to see 2 through 5. Chat, Brian, jump in. 1 and 2 on this list showed me that they can elevate their team in a moment, in a big moment. They gave me evidence of that last year. I didn't see that particularly from Drew Aller in a big moment. I saw Kevin Jennings kind of wilt in the moment. Nico tried. He gave the effort, but he didn't his team didn't come with him. And Dylan Raiola, that's something that we have to see. But Sam Levitt, for me, proved a lot. Just like against the same team, Cade Klubnik proved a lot against Texas. Sam Levitt, to me, proved a lot against Texas. Once again, this is not about Sam Levitt is the best returner. No, these are the guys, for me, that gained a ton of respect from me in the way they played, and I'm looking forward to them being able to take that next step as they return back to their prospective teams. I think they're going to have some fabulous seasons, but I think they're going to have fabulous seasons for who they are as quarterbacks and who they developed into. That's just what I think. There's no way I would say Drew Aller is a better pro prospect than Nico Amaliva or either Dylan Raiola. But you know what? I got a lot of respect for this kid, man. Got a lot of respect. Hopefully they give him some receivers this year, Brian. Hopefully he gets some receivers. Hopefully they give him some receivers.
He had a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Now he didn't play in the playoffs, but Jordan Tyson's legit.
He didn't play in the play.
Right.
No, I was talking about Drew Aller. I was talking about
Drew Aller. Yeah.
Hopefully they get Drew Aller some receivers. Oh, Sam Levitt is the type of kid. He didn't have Jordan Tyson, and it didn't matter to him. He felt very confident that he was going to go out, make plays, and make things happen against Texas. So
he had 4.8.
Those are the 5 guys I'm rocking with.
We're going. It's going to be an interesting conversation, Sean, because my list is a lot different, and I'm very curious what people are going to think about mine versus yours. I did have one thing I want you to think about, Sean, while I'm going through mine, because I want to talk about this before we move on. Because one of the challenges I had with my top 5 is I didn't project a ton on this list, meaning like there's some guys in this list that like, dude, there's no way I can put that kind of list because you got to show me something. And that's different than like DJ and Dylan because they did have certain numbers. And we're going to talk about that. DJ Lagway is the guy that's not going to be on my list. That is what I want you to think about is who are the 2 guys you had the toughest time not putting on and who's the potential breakout that doesn't deserve to be on there now because of the results, but could be on this list at the end of the season because of the talent. So
you want those now?
No. When I'm done with mine, that'll be the thing that we'll wrap up with. So that way you can kind of think about it while I'm giving my list, and then we'll be able to go through that there, Sean. So here's my list. And I went with guys that I think it's a combination of proven. There's some projection into this next season. There has to be some level of projection. guys that I think are the players that have the best chance of giving me a combination of production plus proven ability. I give zero you-know-whats about NFL draft. I don't. This has nothing to do with the NFL draft. This is about who – this isn't even just about who I think the best winners are, because that's more of a team-related thing. These are just the 5 returning veteran quarterbacks that I think are the best at their position, in my opinion, that I would want running my team if they were, like if I was running an offense that fit their skill set. So my number 5 guy is a guy that I think has a chance to move up the list quite a bit if he can fix some stuff, and that's Garrett Nussmeier at LSU. Now, I got some major issues with Garrett Nussmeier. He's very inconsistent. He turns the ball over way too much. He folded in some big minutes last year. But I also saw him step up and make some big-time throws at times last year. For as bad as he played, in my opinion, in the Texas A&M game last season, which was second half, he was abysmal in the second half of that game, and just threw some picks that you're like, bro, I don't even know what to say to you right now. Like, I don't even know what to tell you right now. Some of the throws he made in the fourth quarter against Ole Miss were just unbelievable throws. He made some throws against South Carolina to outduel Lenore Sellers that I thought were very impressive. He made some big-time throws in the win over Vanderbilt, in the win over Baylor in the bowl game, where you're like, the arm talent's very good. If he was a cleaner quarterback, which meant a little bit a better decision maker, more accurate, limit the turnovers, he, in my opinion, could be in the top 2 in this list if he can improve in those areas. He's also going to need help from the offensive line. That's one of my big concerns I had about putting him on this list, but I can't project that. That's not a him problem. So I think Garrett Nussmeier, and then you also got to look at the production, Sean. I mean, for all my issues I have with Garrett Nussmeier, the kid threw for 4,552 yards last year and accounted for 32 touchdowns. When you cannot play great football and put up that kind of production, you've got some talent. So I am projecting a tad here that he's going to clean up some of those areas now in year 2 with a new system. Because remember, he was learning a new system last year as well, to a degree. So I have him number 5 on my list, Sean. Number 4 guy on my list is Blake Horvath from Navy. Now, this is a guy that I know people are going to hate, but this kid can flat out ball, people. This kid can flat out ball. You look at what he did in the bowl game against Oklahoma. I mean, I watched Jalen Milroe struggle to do that against Oklahoma. They were missing guys. It's Navy. Guys, it's Navy. Oklahoma, with half their team not playing in that game, still had way more talent than Navy had. And this is a kid, Sean, that I like because he can throw the football. He can obviously run the football. He's a dynamic player. And look, everybody last year talked about the kid from Army. And for good reason. I watched Blake Horvath outduel him in a big way in that game against Army. I watched this kid step up in some big moments, and he's the only reason the Notre Dame game was not a shutout. Like, if it wasn't for Blake Horvath, that's a 51-0 game, maybe even worse. And he went out and ripped off 2 long runs against Notre Dame, a team that doesn't give up a lot of big plays. Then he goes out against Army, who had a top 5 rush defense, and he rushes for 196 yards in that game. He ran for 211 yards in a win over a ranked Memphis team where they scored 56 points. And then, of course, he goes out and runs for 155 yards against Oklahoma as well. But he's also a kid that can throw the ball, Sean. And so I'm a big fan of Blake Horvath as far as name me more than 3 quarterbacks that run their offense in as impressive fashion as he runs his offense. That's kind of the way I look at it when I have Blake Horvath on here. And they're going to have some dudes. They're going to have some dudes that are coming back on that team too. They got a lot coming back on that offense. I think Blake Horvath's going to be a really, really good quarterback this year. Among the returners, I love him a lot, Sean. I do. My number 3 guy on the list is Josh Hoover from TCU. I think some of y'all are going, who? But I'm telling y'all, go watch some games this kid played. Go watch some of his huddle film. This is a you want to know the epitome of what I view as a system quarterback? Now, and I mean that in a good way, a guy that just executes a system and his skill set fits a system perfectly. Love Josh Hoover, Sean. the other thing I like about him too is there's some projection here for me, but this is still a kid that last year, Sean, passed for 3,949 yards and accounted for 31 touchdowns last season and had some really good games against some good teams on the schedule. Was great in a 1-point win over Texas Tech. He was very good in some of their other big games last season. I think he brings a steady presence. He started at the end of the 23 season was when he first took over. He had 2 400-yard games in that stretch. This kid is a good football player, great for that system. You know, he's not going to be on a lot of top 5 NFL draft boards, but this kid is really good. He's going into really his second full year as a starter, but third year overall. I think the system around him is going to be good. They've got some players coming back. I really like Josh Hoover, again, as a college quarterback. Some of y'all get too wrapped up into NFL tools and intangibles, and I'm saying, give me the guy that produces over the guy that looks good when he does make a throw, and I'm going to be there. And here's a hot take to give a little bit away of who my next 5 is going to be. My next 5, this is my number 1 Big 12 quarterback. Just to give you a heads up. And then we'll have something to say about the Big 12 coming up here in a minute. So my number 2, Drew Aller from Penn State is my number 2. I think this says 2 things, Sean. Number 1, this list speaks to that there's not a lot of great returning quarterbacks in college football, like big time, no doubt about it, guys. But number 2, I think it also speaks to the fact that Drew Aller's been a very steady football player the last couple of years. Very steady player. He's not a dynamic, wow, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, elite top, Pat Mahomes when he was in college. He's not that. Drew Aller just gets the job done. And he did it with a very mediocre receiving core last year. Yes, they had a great tight end, but that was it. And like you said, Sean, I love what he did in some of the moments they needed him to play well. My thing with a lot of these guys, with Nussmeier, with Hoover's got to limit some of the bad interceptions. Aller didn't throw a lot of picks last year, but he had some bad ones, and he's got to limit some of the bad turnovers. And I think that he's going to have a better receiving core around him this year. The offensive line is going to be pretty good. And somebody in the chat just said he does not have the clutch gene. I disagree, and I think that's where I think we have the biggest disagreement with when it comes to Drew Aller is no, he didn't have the clutch gene against Notre Dame. No, he didn't have but I mean, he actually led them down the field to get into, like against Ohio State. Do we forget that it was Drew Aller that led them down the field to get to the 1-yard line, and then it was the O-line and the running backs that got dominated from getting them there? He got them there, and then they couldn't put in the ball in the end zone. I don't necessarily put that on him, and I thought the way that he played to bring them back against Oregon impressed me. It did. And the other thing I liked about him is he made some big-time throws after Notre Dame took the lead against them to get them back in that game. So he made a bad play at the end of that game, but the Notre Dame defense overwhelmed Penn State in the second half of that game. He also, let's not forget, on their touchdown drive, threw a ball to a running back that flat out got dropped that should have allowed them to go up 14-0, but the guy dropped the pass. So Drew Aller is not an elite quarterback, but amongst the returners, he's the most steady. He's the guy that I can count on the most. And you say, gave away a game to Michigan last year. Bro, he was a sophomore as a first-year starter. Are we still going to hold stuff against him and just pretend like what a guy does in year one? This is the crap that made people have such bad takes about Bo Nix, because they were still holding on to what he did at Auburn, and they ignored what he was doing in Oregon because they couldn't get over emotionally what he did at Auburn. Right? And I think that's where a lot of those bad takes about him came from. Guys develop. They get better. And he's getting better. Now he's got to become a guy, Sean, that I think that going into year 2 of the Andy Kotelnicki era is going to help him. It's going to help him a bunch, in my opinion. So my number 1 guy coming back, Sean, is Cade Klubnik. And again, I think what this says is this is a guy that is produced. This is a guy that has experience. But here's the other thing about him too, Sean. No quarterback last year, in my opinion, changed his perception more from game 1 to get to the final game of the season than Cade Klubnik. Because after the Georgia game, I was like, he's done. He'll never be what we hoped he was going to be. Like, if they had another quarterback, he might be in trouble. By the end of the year, I'm like, this kid's really flipping good. And his production shocked me. When you look at his production at the end of the year, 3,600 passing yards, 400 rushing yards, 43 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. The production is there. He put his team on his shoulders last year at different times. The Pitt game, you talked about the game winner against Pitt. His team wasn't always great, but he's a guy that I look at and say, dependable, produces, wins a lot of football games. That's where I'm at. So that's my 5. I want to talk about this next list, Sean, which is who are some guys that aren't on your list that you think by the end of the year you're going to say, yeah, I should have put him on my list, and why is he not on there now? And then also the breakout. And I'll start and just give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's a couple guys that I had a hard time putting on my list because I just don't think they're there yet. I think they're guys that have a lot of highlight reels. I think they're guys that have some moments, but they're guys that, to me, lack a little bit of that consistency and the production. So a lot of people in the chat, why isn't Lenore Sellers on this list? Oh, yeah, I'll tell you why.
Can I answer that?
Of course.
Because Luke Altmaier had better numbers, and beat him in the bowl game. So if you're gonna put Lenore Sellers on there, then put Luke Altmaier.
But see, that's my thing. I think
that was easy for me.
I think people saw Lenore Sellers play in a game or two where he played well. They saw him play early against LSU, and he played well. Played great against Missouri. Had some really good throws against Texas A&M. There's some other times he looked very mediocre, looked very average. And for him, it's about consistency for Lenore Sellers. Now, the reason that I have him on my list as a guy that I'm like, I may look back and regret this, but I'm comfortable with it now, is because he does have the tools to take that next level jump. But I can't because you could say, well, he outdueled Cade Klubnik, sort of, but then, okay, but Garrett Nussmeier outdueled him. And, there's all these different things you can look at. I think Lenore Sellers is a talented quarterback, but he still has more to prove to me before I can say he's top 5 right now. And also the production's not elite either, Sean. He ran for 674 yards last year. He only passed for 2,500 yards last year, and he had 25 touchdowns. And you know what I mean? Like I don't think the production is there. The talent is good. The highlight reels are good. When he's on his game, he's really good. But there's a lot more of this for him. And that's kind of what kept Nico off my list too, Sean, is there's a lot of mediocre football on his schedule last year and some really impressive football. Luke Altmaier, to me, is the guy that I considered, Sean. But it's just the level of play is just not – the talent's not there. I don't know that the offense is there for him to put up the production to be there. But I'll tell you the other thing too, Sean, that I had a tough time with. Dylan Raiola is another one, because you made a point about what they got coming back. They had a great portal class as well at receiver. They got the Kentucky kid, Dane Key. They got Naziah Hunter from Cal. They got Rocco Spindler at guard. Like, he could be one that I'm looking back and saying he should be on here. But I don't have a lot of sophomores on here. I don't have DJ Lagway on here, for example, because they've got a lot to prove to me. But they're guys that by the end of the year could have a shot to be on there that I look at and say, you know what, like, man, I think I may look back on that. And then my Kevin Jennings is one that I felt comfortable leaving off, because I felt like as the season wore on and people got a read on him, he wasn't as effective. And I find it strange that they went out and went to the portal to find people to compete with him, which I thought was interesting. I thought about putting Haynes King on there, but he's got to prove to me he can play a full season. That's my thing on Haynes King. He's got to prove to me he can play. Because if he'd have been healthy all year, his numbers would have been like, dude, how do you not have Haynes King on there? He's got to prove to me. Avery Johnson's another guy. Rocco Beck people talk about. But I'm comfortable with the list that I have, with the exception of those guys. That's my list of guys. And then my breakout, Sean, as I kick it to you, the guy that's not on my list has no argument to be on my list right now, but has a shot to become a guy that has a potential by the end of the year, is a no-brainer top 5 pick, is DJ Lagway. Anyone putting DJ Lagway on their list right now is 100% projecting something onto him. And I project some with guys, but it's not a full-throated, he was this last year, he can't be this year. That's why I don't have Nico on there, for example. DJ Lagway last year passed for 1,900 yards, only rushed for 100 yards. He barely had 2,000 yards of offense and only accounted for 12 touchdowns and threw 9 picks. Is he an elite talent? Absolutely. Could he end up being an elite player this year? Absolutely. But there has to be some level of he's got a lot to prove before he gets there. That is why he's not on my list. I would have put Dylan Raiola on there before I'd have put DJ Lagway on there in a preseason top 5 list. But I also, Sean, won't be shocked if at the end of the year we're ranking quarterbacks at the end of the year and DJ Lagway's on there, because there's no debating his toughness. There's no debating his talent. And I think as he started to pick the system up more and more and more, you saw a kid that's got the chance to be a star. But from where he is now to where he is to be a star, long way to go. If he had not started last year, he might be number 1 on my list, at worst number 2 of my new first-year starters. He's got that kind of ability. But he's a long way to go to get there. That's why DJ wasn't on there. But he's my breakout pick of guy not on this list who could be a breakout and get there. So that's where I'm at with DJ. What is your list, Sean? First, the guys that you kind of, didn't have on your list who you think, you had a tough time with, and then who's your breakout player?
I'm gonna be honest. I really thought about putting Diego Pavia on this list, right around 4 or 5.
The Vanderbilt quarterback.
Yeah, I really did. Really impressed with that young man being at the forefront of the resurgence of Vanderbilt and how that offense was able to go up against top teams. I think later in the season, when I watched them against some really good defenses, things didn't go the same. And I was like, okay, there it is. He's still missing some pieces outside of him to help him in moments like that. But I think coming back, being in his second year there, I think he can definitely improve. I really liked what I saw. He almost creeped in and knocked both of the youngsters out at 5. He almost got rid of both of the youngsters, and the love and respect I gained for them at the end of the season, and went with him at 5. Another one, I thought about Carson Beck. I did.
He's not eligible for this list though. He's on the next one.
Because he's on the next one. But
let me say one thing about Pavia real quick, is to tell people why he's not on my list.
Yeah.
If you look at his last 6 games, his highest passing yards total was 186.
Mm-hmm.
His highest yards per attempt total was 7.8. He had 2 games where he completed less than 50% of his passes. And in his last 7 games, his highest completion percent was 61.9. And that was in a bowl game where he only passed for 160 yards. And then in that stretch too, it's not like he had a 100-yard rushing game. So when I just look at the overall production, Sean, that was my issue. Only 28 touchdowns, just over 3,000 total yards of offense. He's gritty. He's a winner. He's all that kind of stuff. But as far as like a top quarterback, he's always going to win at a higher level than what he's going to produce and really be talent-wise. He's sort of that guy as opposed to a top individual quarterback. That was kind of my issue with Diego Pavia's. I think people what we fall victim to as fans is I saw this guy play that one game against Bama, and so he's big time. And I'm like, yeah, but did you watch him the rest of the year? Because he never repeated that Bama performance the rest of the year. 252 passing yards, 80% completions, 12.6 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, also ran for 56 yards, but he never came close to doing that again, except against Ball State. 4.9 yards per attempt against Texas, 6.5 against Auburn, 5.4 against South Carolina, 6.1 against Tennessee. Like that's where to me he can't be on my list. Why I didn't really have an issue like leaving him off. I think we both had a much tougher time, or I had a much tougher time with Lenore Sellers than I did Diego Pavia.
Yeah, and then the person for me, for different reasons, it's not apples to apples, but I think the impact that Blake Horvath has for Navy was the same impact that Jake Retzlaff had for BYU. Like I just think that kid, what he meant to BYU and the confidence he gave them on offense, coming back another year, I think BYU bears watching in their Big 12 and how that offense could improve in year 2 with Jake Retzlaff. That was a guy I thought about. I didn't think about Sellers, like I said, for me. And once again, my list was not about, saw somebody say, I'll take Sellers over Altmaier any day. That wasn't what my list was about. Altmaier had better stats, better numbers, with less talent, and beat him head up. Like, I don't care who the offensive coordinator was. He beat him head up in the bowl game. And Altmaier faced a more difficult defense than Sellers did in that matchup, by the way. So if I'm not going to consider a guy that's at my alma mater, then I'm definitely not going to consider
You're not going to get a guy that beat him.
No.
Sean, who is your breakout? No. Who's your breakout guy?
I'm going to be
a
honest,
guy that
man.
just should not be on this list, but could end up still being a star when it's all said and done. Like, did my DJ Lagway thing make sense? Like, there's no way you can argue a kid who barely has 2,000 yards, has 12 touchdowns, and 9 picks is on a top 5 list. But you also can't deny that this is one of the 5 most talented quarterbacks in the country.
Yes, I would agree with that assessment of DJ Lagway. And of course, he has to be healthy.
Yeah,
he has to be healthy now.
Right,
it's one of his shoulders that they're trying to, nurse him along. He just came off the leg injury, so it's like, hey, can we trust that he's going to be healthy for the majority of the season or throughout the season next year to be able to make that ascension? We don't know, Brian. We just don't know.
Yeah. Who is your breakout?
Oh, it was DJ for me.
Oh, it's DJ. Okay, so we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
Here's a guy, and Andrew Gilmore and I are about the my number 2 potential breakout, and you know where I'm going to go with this one, Sean. It's Aiden Childs.
Mm-hmm. We both love him.
Super talented. Doesn't belong to be on this list because he has a long way to go. But it wouldn't shock me if year 2 under Jonathan Smith, that kid has a breakout season. He's incredibly talented. I think Haynes King is the guy that I think I'm going to, even more so than Lenore Sellers. Like, for everybody talking about Lenore Sellers, why aren't you talking about Haynes King? Haynes King was a far more productive quarterback than Lenore Sellers was last year. Far more productive. And has a lot more experience as a quarterback as well. So that's where I'm at with that one, Sean. So that's my list of the 5 starters. We're going to get to the top 5 transfers next, and then the top 5 first-year starters. What's up?
Watch that kid from Washington, too.
Damon Williams. Yeah. I count him as a first-year guy because I know he played some last year, but he was more of an injury fill-in guy.
Yeah, he can be a breakout,
Yes.
But you're right. He could be that first-time guy. On the next list,
And I talked about him a little bit last week, Sean. He's a very interesting player because he's a different type of cat. He's not going to put up numbers necessarily that are going to blow people away, but he's a very interesting player. So we're going to get to our transfer quarterbacks next, folks. But before we do, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. If you're listening via podcast platform, please give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. And of course, if you are not on the message board at boards.oursbreakdown.com, you are absolutely missing out. That is where you guys can go and we can continue this quarterback conversation. But that is our 5 returning starting quarterbacks in college football, our top 5 lists. Second part of the quarterback breakdown, Sean, is going to look at the top 5 transfers. So this is first-year transfers, guys that were at a different school last year. They can be guys who are new starters or guys that have started before. It's any transfer can be on this list, Sean. I'm going to let you kick things off with your top 5 of transfer quarterbacks. But I did want to say this, and I wanted to ask you this. I think this transfer class is significantly beneath last year's transfer class. I look at last year's transfer class with Cam Ward. You think of Riley Leonard. You think of Will Howard. I don't think this transfer class, I think the dominant quarterbacks, I mean, if you look at last year's semifinals, two of the 4 teams that were in the semifinal and the 2 teams that won both had first-year transfer quarterbacks, veteran guys, talented players. I don't think we're going to see the same transfer impact this year. I think when we look at the top quarterbacks in the country, it's going to be returners and newcomers at places they've been. And I think that's going to be a little bit different here. But I do think there's a lot of good transfer quarterbacks. I just don't think at the top there's the same number of big-time quarterbacks. Like there's no Riley Leonard this year. There's no Cam Ward this year that not only produces but also has the big-time tools. That was my overall takeaway, Sean. I want to get your thoughts on that, and then you can transition right into what your top 5 actually is.
Okay, I'm gonna need a little help from you here because I did not write them in order. I know the five that we
Okay.
discussed, so just put it up and then I'll get
Yep.
to
Because
my
your
fifth.
first list you changed when we were talking, so
Yeah,
that
yeah.
so people understand why. But what are your overall thoughts on the portal, the portal quarterback class overall?
Oh, it doesn't even compare to last year. Doesn't compare to last year. And this, number five for me is a familiar someone that actually at the end of 2023 and in the beginning of 2024, a lot of people, a lot of Notre Dame fans were looking at that last game of the year saying, man, I don't know. I don't want to face this kid. He looks really good. He was really good in that bowl game at 23. He started
Against
out
who?
24 on fire.
Against who? You want to know why Jeff Brom picked the quarterback he picked in the portal this year? It's the kid that threw for 372 yards and 6 touchdowns against him in that bowl game. Sean's number 5 is Miller Moss.
Miller Moss, man. I absolutely love the situation and the coach that he's going to. I think he's going to get the very best. We've seen his previous quarterbacks that when they got there, he elevated them and they played their very best under Jeff Brom's tutelage. So I expect the same thing from Miller Moss. I think he's going to be very intriguing to watch at Louisville in that offense. And they're going to have some talent around them as well. Running back, wide receiver.
Bell came back.
Yes.
The kid from Colin Lacey's coming back. They got talented tight ends. Their top two most talented running backs both came back. Yes, you were correct. He's going to have some weapons for sure.
He's going to have some weapons around him. So Miller Moss is number 5 for me. Number 4, let's see who I had. Fernando Mendoza.
I did text you, by the way, Sean. I texted your list.
Okay.
You want to
appreciate it. So Fernando Mendoza is definitely going to be someone in the chat said interesting. I just think for me, I think this is I go back to the game that he played against Miami, prime time or late night when they had Miami down big early, and eventually Cam Ward put his cape on and led Miami back to the victory. But I think Fernando Mendoza showed himself very well, was pretty consistent for Cal last year. We do have an interesting conversation that we had that the quarterback coming in to Cal is going to go a long way to showing whether or not he was successful because of the system at Cal or just what he was able to do as a quarterback.
Does that be Devin Brown, who was at Ohio State?
Devin Brown, former Ohio State quarterback, yes. But, I love, once again, just like Miller Moss, I love the coaching and the system that he's going to. And he, once again, great talent at the skill position coming back in a system that he's going to be able to go into and be successful, just as his predecessor was. So number 4 for me, Fernando Mendoza, I think is going to turn out pretty well for him at Indiana. And like you said, another Notre Dame offensive lineman that's going to be blocking for him as well. Number 3, look, I know what everybody wants to say, but you can't leave, in my opinion, you can't leave Carson Beck off this list. The injury is going to play a major part in this if he can come back fully healthy. But for me, for all the detractors of what he did, especially the turnover, look, at Georgia, all you have to do is not give the game away. And more than likely, you're going to win. Yes, he was a beneficiary of Georgia's talent and of Georgia's system. Yes, in the program. Yes, he was. But despite that, he came in and he put up some pretty decent numbers that led people to think that he was going to be a Heisman contender going into last year. And then, unfortunately, he underwhelmed. I think under the pressure, the immense pressure that he came into the season with, I think that's what led to a lot of the turnovers. We can get to,
and he played a real schedule. Let's be honest.
He played a real schedule.
He played in 2023 was a freaking joke.
And he lost 2 dudes. He lost 2 dudes, one at wide receiver and an all-world tight end as well. That was the ultimate security blanket in clutch situations. Like Bowers was that dude, and you saw when he went to the NFL, like that wasn't like fantasy. That was actually who he was against the best of the best. And so I think he was affected by that. But I go back to, look, I give him respect because he was the reason they got down big against Georgia. And then He was the
Bama.
reason that they were able to come back and make some big plays in the passing game to ultimately take the lead. But then once again, who he is reared his ugly head when they were right back in position to win the game. What does he do? He throws the interception in the end zone. So very intriguing, but he's number 3 on my list. Number 2, John Mateer, man. John Mateer. Going into Oklahoma, I think it's a great situation, Brian, because it's a situation where the expectations that are normally at Oklahoma, I don't think they exist right now. I think he comes in being able to play with his hair let loose, let his hair down, and get a ton of credit for the resurgence of Oklahoma football. And I expect that he's going to be able to do that. I love this young man.
You know what helps him a ton, Sean? Of all the transfers, he's the one guy going with his offensive coordinator. So like all these other transfers are going to a place where they got to learn a new offense. He's the one guy that's following his offensive coordinator, or you could say maybe his offensive coordinator was brought in to get him with him. We could debate that, but he'll have the least transition to make compared to those other guys. I think that's a big part of the deal for John Mateer.
Yeah, I'm just interested in how long his leash will be. Like, is he walking into a situation where they're like, "You are the guy,"
or is he's the guy? Yeah, he's the guy because of Jackson Arnold leaving and what's behind him is not great.
Yeah. Number 1 for me, and I say this because we had questions. Caden Salter going in Colorado. I understand what the situation is. I understand that Travis Hunter is not there, but I will say this: Colorado under Deion Sanders has been able to put pretty good skill position players at wide receiver out there on the field. Travis Hunter wasn't the only receiver that they had that was pretty good. And they had 2 receivers last year that were injured the majority of the year. So for me, I think Caden Salters is going to have skill position guys. Is Caden Salter going to have I said this, wouldn't it be ironic if they solved the offensive line the year after Shedeur leaves? Like, if all of a sudden the Colorado offensive line actually becomes a good offensive line and Caden Salter is the actual benefactor of that, it will be funny and it bears watching. I think the Big 12 has a chance to be maybe the conference of quarterbacks.
Sean, I forgot to talk about that. I was going to talk about that in the first show. There's no league that I had more kids on my list that I considered for top lists than the Big 12.
Yeah.
I mean, you had Sam Levitt on your list. I had Josh Hoover. They also have Avery Johnson at K-State, who's a potential breakout player. Rocco Becht put up big numbers. That kid had 2,000-yard receivers last year. Sawyer Robertson at Baylor had really good production last year. Jalen Daniels is a guy with a big-time reputation. Noah Fafidi is a guy that 2 years ago had everybody raving about him. Like, there's going to be a lot of really good quarterback play in that league. Really good quarterback play in that league. Yeah. And there's a couple other schools that have guys that I'm like, let me see how this guy does at Oklahoma State, some guys like that. But like there for a fact, this is, I would argue, the deepest quarterback league when it comes to college production. And then of course you talk about Caden Salter and what he's going to bring to Colorado. This is going to be a fun year. This is going to look like an old school Big 12 league. I don't think it's because they don't have defense like they used to. I think it's just because a lot of these teams in this league have been able to go out into the portal and get some really talented football players at different positions. Yeah. Some of these kids are homegrown. Some of these quarterbacks are homegrown. Josh Hoover's homegrown. But it's more so like K-State can go out and get Dylan Edwards out of the portal and get the receivers that are out of the portal more so than they've been able to get D linemen and linebackers and DBs that are impactful. I think that's a big part of it as well. But that's going to be a fun league to watch this year because there's a lot of good quarterbacks coming back that have played a lot of football and produced a lot at that level. Yeah. It's going to be a fun year. Yeah. So that's your five, Sean.
That's my five.
Was there anybody else that you looked at and said, "Hey, I thought about this guy, I thought about that guy. I know that who you had originally had Carson. You had originally had
Jackson Arnold was on my list. I scratched him off of Miller Moss. I thought about Malik Murphy. I thought about a couple of other kids that transferred.
Weird situation what that was. Like you go to Duke, you do well, and then you leave to go to Oregon State. I have a feeling he jumped in the portal thinking he was going to get a lot more interest than he did.
I
because he
agree.
jumped in the portal like right away.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he jumped in thinking like teams are going to be after me and I'm the man, and then just the interest just wasn't there for
Yeah,
him.
but I'll
Yeah.
name those two guys, and then I won't name some other guys that I thought about because I don't
Because
want
I
to
got
step. I don't want to
yeah.
step on your list. Yeah.
Well, I'll start with number 5, Caden Salter for me, Sean. This is a kid that's obviously a very talented football player, has produced a lot in his career at Liberty. The reason that he's lower on my list is because I don't know how he fits at there. Because when I look at him, you look at what he did 2 years ago at Liberty, for example, in a different system. It's a kid that passed for – he's on my list at 5, not because of what he did last year. What he did last year, he's not on my list. Passed for 1,800 yards, completed 56% of his passes, had 15 touchdowns passing, 6 picks. He had 7 rushing touchdowns, only 500 yards in 11 games. He's on my list because of what he did 2 years ago, when he passed for 28.76, averaged 9.9 yards per attempt compared to 7.2 last year. Had 32 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, had over 1,000 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Now, they didn't play a whole lot of good teams, and when he went and played against Oregon, he didn't look very good, but the whole team wasn't nearly as good. But he had really good Power 5 talent around him. You know, when you look at like the receiver they had and the production they had there, one of their receivers is a kid that transferred to C.J. Daniels kid that transferred to LSU. That LSU had last year. So he was a guy that, he had some pretty good weapons around him. He's on my list because I think of what he can do. But my big question mark, and why I have him as low as I did, is because I just don't know how well he fits that offense. You're going to have to run a very different offense with him at quarterback compared to what you did with Shedeur Sanders. I mean, you went from a kid, you're going to a kid who rushed for over 1,000 yards 2 years ago to a kid this past year that had minus 50 yards rushing this past year. It's a very different type of quarterback, and that's something that gives me a little bit of pause on where I'm going to put him on my list. My next quarterback on the list, Sean, is Thomas Castellanos from Florida State. Now, he's a reason that I was not high on BC last year, but he's a reason that I kind of like Florida State this year. Now, he's not even guaranteed to start. He's battling Brock Glenn for the starting quarterback job. But remember who Thomas Castellanos signed with out of high school. He signed with UCF. Who was the coach at UCF? Gus Malzahn. He's going to Florida State. The one thing we know about Gus, he's going to do what he does no matter who he has. And if he has a good throwing quarterback, he's going to bench that guy for the guy that can run. That's who Gus Malzahn is. That is what he's always going to be. That's why the best team he had at Auburn as the OC was a team that had Nick Marshall on it. Like post-Cam, when you look at the post-Cam Newton era, the best team is a team that had Nick Marshall, who was probably better off playing receiver or DB, if we're being completely honest about it, Sean, right? So, that's just kind of how I see him, because obviously he was the OC for Cam Newton. He was the head coach with Nick Marshall. And then he went out and tried to get like Sean White, some different guys that could throw the ball a little bit, and the offenses were never any good. Thomas Castellanos is the perfect Gus Malzahn quarterback because he can throw a little bit. But he can throw not in a Bill O'Brien type of offense, but in a Gus Malzahn type of air raid dual threat quarterback. I think Thomas Castellanos is going to be a really good player to watch. The other thing I like about it is I have no idea what type of team Florida State is going to be as a whole this year, Sean. But the reality is he's going to have some kids to throw to. They went out and got Squirrel White from Tennessee, who fits that offense. They got Deuce Robinson from USC. They got Hakeem Williams coming back, who I'm a big fan of. They got Landon Thomas, who was a highly ranked recruit at tight end coming out of high school. The running backs are just okay. But the thing is, I was listening to, who was it? I can't remember who it was. Somebody was breaking down Florida State, and they were talking about it. Might have been Greg McElroy, who I like as an analyst, especially when he's doing his own podcast. Like, I don't love him on ESPN because he's got to do the ESPN tap dance. But when he does on his podcast, Greg is really good. And he was talking about one of the issues he has with Florida State is he doesn't love their running back room. And I'm like, totally agree. But with Thomas Castellanos, you don't got to worry about that. That's not, it's kind of like, if Notre Dame had elite running backs, but if they didn't have elite running backs, they still would have been able to run the football. Kind of like LSU a couple years ago. I'm not saying this kid's Jane Daniels, but when you looked at it, you're like, hey, they didn't have great running backs 2 years ago. You didn't need to. This is a kid that 2 years ago, Sean, at BC, passed for 2,200 yards and 15 touchdowns, rushed for 1,100 yards and 13 touchdowns. Now, the thing with him is he's got to protect the ball better. He did a much better job of that last year under Bill O'Brien. But Bill O'Brien, this is where I talk about coaches who are just going to do their thing. Bill O'Brien, with this kid starting 8 games for him, rushed for 194 yards. That's it. Never had a single 100-yard game. This is a kid that rushed for 1,000 yards the year before. But Bill O'Brien's going to do what Bill O'Brien's going to do, and that's just what coaches are. But this kid in a system that he fits, I think he's going to have a big year. And he could easily go up on my list, but A, I'm not sure he's going to start. And B, there's just so much uncertainty, and the toxicity around that program makes me a little bit concerned about that one. Number 3 on my list, Sean, Mark Gronowski from Iowa. Now, this is an FCS transfer, which gives me some pause about, do I have him too high? Because there's been a lot of FCS quarterbacks that have gone to the next level and not performed well. But this is a kid that I think will do well, Sean. He's a very experienced player. South Dakota State has been a tremendous program, won the title 2 years ago. He's going into his 4th year as a starter. He was not a full-time starter in his first year in 2020. But then the last 3 years, he was over 2,900 yards in 22, 3,000 in 23, threw for over 2,700 yards last year. This is a kid that's got about 1,800 yards rushing in his career. He's got over 30 rushing touchdowns in his career, has passed for 26, 29, and 23 touchdowns the last 3 years at South Dakota State, and a kid that's had to play against Power 5 schools. I mean, you want to know what he can kind of do at the next level. Now, again, Oklahoma State wasn't that good last year, but he passed for 264 yards in a loss at Oklahoma State last year and 2 touchdowns. You know, this is a kid that's been in the college football playoffs the last 2 years. Now, this is a young man that I think has the tools to be a really good quarterback, and I think he brings an element to the table that Iowa desperately needs, Sean. They desperately need someone who can make plays as a quarterback. Not just run a system, but can make plays as a quarterback, can run around a little bit. I wouldn't call him a dual threat quarterback. I'd say he's a mobile quarterback. And to me, there's a difference. So I like Mark Gronowski at Iowa. I think he's going to have a really good season for them. Number 2 on my list is Francisco Mendoza. You had him on your list as well, Sean. I love Francisco Mendoza at Indiana. He is a passing quarterback that's mobile. He can run around. He can make some plays with his legs. He likes to extend more than necessarily take off running, but he can run. I wouldn't, again, not a dual threat guy, but a mobile pocket passer. I think he's a gritty kid. He's a playmaker. You know, we've seen him kind of put that team on his shoulders. Now, the one misnomer that I think people have about him as well, you know, he's going to go to Indiana and he's going to have better players. Maybe no, he had some really good receivers at Cal the last couple of years, and they worked well together. He had Jeremiah Hunter. He had Neziah Hunter this past year. But this is a kid that I think is going to go to Indiana. I think he fits that offense extremely well. Didn't throw for a lot of touchdowns, didn't account for a lot of touchdowns last year, but yards-wise, he was very productive. I think that was more of a byproduct of the system, to be completely honest with you. He also had 8 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games, so you started to see more of that kind of come to fruition. But this is a kid that threw for 385 yards against Wake Forest, 364 against Oregon State, 282 against NC State. And his 3,000 yards came with him not playing in the last 2 games of the season. So if you look at his average, his yards per game passing last year, he was at 273. So if he plays the last 2 games, he's at over 3,500 yards last year. So the production is good, and he'll have a good running back room. He'll have a good offensive line. He'll have Elijah Surratt. He'll have Omar Cooper coming back. He'll have a tight end to throw the ball to. So I think and I honestly considered him for my number 1 spot. But my number 1 guy on this list, Sean, is I am going with John Mateer from Oklahoma. This is a really dynamic run-throw quarterback. There's a lot of that in the transfer portal this year. There's a lot of those dual-threat run-throw guys on the list. Obviously, Caden Salter is that. He's had a 1,000-yard season rushing. You look at Thomas Castellanos has had a 1,000-yard season as a rusher. John Mateer is similar to that. If you look at his production the last couple of years, this last year at Washington State, Sean, he passed for 3,100 yards and 29 touchdowns. He rushed for over 800 yards and 15 touchdowns. Now, he did that against a schedule that was more of a Mountain West schedule than it was a Power 4 schedule. So he is making a jump which is, you think Washington State, you think Power 4, but they played Texas Tech, Washington, and Syracuse and Oregon State. Those are the only quote-unquote power conference teams they played. The rest of their schedule is Portland State, San Jose State, Boise, Fresno, Hawaii, San Diego State, Utah State, New Mexico, Wyoming. And he didn't play against Syracuse last year. So this is a kid to me that is a system quarterback, but he's a great fit for the system. And you look at what he did against Texas Tech last year, only rushed for 115 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. You're thinking, man, that guy's going to – but then look what he also did in that 21-point win. He rushed for 197 yards and a touchdown. And the reason I like him is because he doesn't have to be on his game as a thrower to still dominate. And I think guys like that make good transfer quarterbacks. Perfect example, Riley Leonard, Cam Ward, guys that didn't always have to be running the system incredibly well to be impactful. But as I said before, the one big difference with John Mateer and all these other guys on the list, as far as I know, because I don't think this is true for anybody else, sort of Thomas Castellanos, he's going to be playing for the same guy he played with the last 2 years of Washington State. And so I think that's going to help him. And he's going to have really good players around him. Now, he had good receivers at Washington State last year, but I think as long as they can stay healthy, that's obviously the big problem with receiving corps at Oklahoma last year is they couldn't stay healthy. But he's a guy that's going to have weapons around him, Sean. The only question that I have and the big struggle I think there is actually a lot of pressure on him this year because of the pressure that's on his head coach. And so there's a lot of pressure on Oklahoma to go out and win this year, and they're putting a lot of the pressure on the reason a lot of Oklahoma fans think there will be a turnaround is because he's coming in to be their quarterback. He was my favorite portal pickup this offseason, and I think there was a lot of good portal pickups this year, but there was no elite, like high-level portal pickups like I think we saw last year. So I really like this kid. I think he's going to be able to make – and somebody in the chat said it's going to be a big jump in competition. It will be. There's no doubt. That's why I think it's so important that he's following his OC in that he doesn't have to learn a new system, but he will also have better players around him compared to what he had at Washington State as well. So those are some guys I like. Sean, there's a lot of other portal guys I considered. I did consider Carson Beck. I think Carson Beck's overrated. Part of the reason I don't have him on my list is I don't know that we know what Carson Beck is going to be this year. This guy had a pretty significant arm injury, and I think we're just assuming he's going to be good because, that's what they say. But, this is a kid that I want to see that he's even healthy first. I'm not a big fan of him. I don't know how good that offensive line is going to be in pass pro. It's pretty good run blocking O-line, but it's not always the best pass pro offensive line. But Miller Moss he's got to prove it to me. He's talent. He's not, I don't think he's overly talented. I think he's a great fit for that system, but I'm not a huge Miller Moss fan. You have Darian Mensah, the Tulane kid who transferred to Duke. I'm not as high on him as maybe some other guys. I think he was a good player at Tulane. I considered Connor Wegman going to Houston, but he's got to show me he's got some mental toughness that he did not show at Texas A&M before I could put him on my list. Here's a couple sleepers for me. And these are guys that aren't necessarily – they haven't really started a whole lot, but some guys I'm keeping an eye on. Luke Kromenhoek at Mississippi State. He's the kid that was at Florida State last year. I like him in Jeff Lebby's offense. I like him in Jeff Lebby's offense a lot. He is not guaranteed to be the starter. They also got the Blake Shapen kid from Baylor is also there, so he's kind of the veteran. But if Luke Kromenhoek wins that starting job, keep an eye on him. I loved Ricky Collins coming out of high school. I'm very curious to see what he's going to do in that system at Syracuse. What's Devin Brown going to do at Cal? And he's going back home. He's a California kid. And then another sleeper guy to consider that I got my eye on, Sean, is Justin Martin, the UCLA transfer at Maryland. I think that system fits him very well, and he's got a big arm. I loved that kid. Notre Dame looked at him a little bit coming out of high school. He was committed to UCLA. Really talented thrower, really talented arm. He's just very raw and he's inexperienced. But those are some other guys on my list that I considered. And then here was maybe the best portal pickup off this list. Maybe he's not one of the 5 best, but is a great pickup for that team. Loved Northwestern getting Preston Stone from SMU. It's a really good pickup. Really good pickup for them. Because I said that to you, I was like, did you know? Because I actually didn't even know that he went to Northwestern until I was going through all the rosters and kind of getting caught up on who was where. I was like, holy moly, I didn't know the precedent. I mean, I knew he transferred, but I didn't realize he went to Northwestern.
That's a great pickup. Great pickup for Northwestern, because they've been trying to solidify their quarterback situation. And hopefully, they can do it, because it's a tough-minded team, well-coached team, very disciplined. Really they don't beat themselves. They just have never had that guy or the requisite talent on offense at the skill positions to really make the plays in big-time matchups or fourth quarters. They were right there with Ohio State for like 2.5 quarters, and then all of a sudden the Buckeyes just took off. So they're well-coached, well-ran, outside of the foolishness that's happened and the legal things that have been taking place. Yeah. I did. This next topic is where I love your list. The Castellanos pick for me is sneaky good, good, because I think with that OC in that program, especially with the pressure kind of because of last year, I love guys that can walk in with expectations kind of tampered down a little bit because of a disappointing season, and being able to walk in and do what they need to do and elevate things. I like that situation for Castellanos, even though, like Sean, you said, he's in a quarterback battle.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, because I will say this. I felt very good about the 5 I had. I mean, there's other guys I like, but I felt very good about the 5 I had. What I did not feel good about is the ranking of where they were in that 5. Meaning, like, I didn't love where I had Caden Salter. For the reasons I talked about. He could be higher. He could end up not on the list, depending on how it goes. I mean, he's still got to beat out Juju Lewis also this year. He's going to get a shot to play. Castellanos, I was back and forth on where to put him. Other than Mateer at 1, there was a lot of, I'm not sure where to place guys. Did you have that struggle, or did you feel pretty good like that? Your top 5 just kind of naturally flowed, or at least your top 4 kind of naturally flowed.
Well, for me, like I said, to keep myself from having to battle, I really made my list based upon my interests, situations, and how things will go. It's not me saying, well, I think this guy is going to be better than that guy, or he's going to put up better numbers than that guy. For me, the most intriguing was the Colorado situation because of Shedeur, because of the system. We talked about this before the show. Like, does that system that Shermer runs at Colorado, does it fit, or does he have to adjust to the talent that he has in Caden Salter and what he does best? That's going to be interesting to watch. I was very comfortable with the Mendoza going to Indiana. That probably was outside of Mateer. Mateer and Mendoza were probably the 2 most comfortable with where I put them. And then after that, Carson Beck, I really wasn't comfortable with that. Because of the injury, the situation that he's going to.
But the production is good.
The production is good, right?
People talking about the receiving core he's going to have at Miami. It's better than the one he had at Georgia. You guys do know all of the receivers Cam Ward had last year are gone, right? Like, all of them are gone. 3 of the kids went to the NFL, and then the tall kid went to Bama.
Right.
So, like, if you read any board at Miami, they're all going to talk about they desperately have to go to the portal and get wide receivers this offseason. So, if you think watching Miami last year makes you feel like they're going to have a good receiving core this year, just keep in mind, none of those guys you watched on film last year are playing for Miami this year. Now, they can end up being okay. They have a young kid that I love a lot, Nikar, but they've had to go to the port. I mean, any boards you read about Miami, they're talking about how their coaches are telling them, their sources are telling them that they're going to go to the portal for a wide receiver. I don't think Miami's recruited all that well at receiver from the standpoint of recruiting and getting them to stay. That's the thing, is like a lot of those guys have left. Now, they do have some talent there. CJ Daniels came from Liberty, or from LSU, but he couldn't crack the rotation at LSU. I like the Trader kid. JJ Trader's a good player. Nikar I like, but they've got some major question marks. And they lost Elijah Arroyo at tight end. So they've got a lot of question marks with pass catchers. And kind of like the issue that Riley Leonard had last year, where he couldn't throw in the offseason. The way that he couldn't practice with him, but at least Riley could throw last spring. Carson Beck can't even throw. So, yes, Isaiah Horton. That's who I said, the tall kid that went to Bama. I love that pickup for Bama, by the way, which I've talked about before. All right, so Sean, we're going to get to first-year starters next, but before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. We would love a 5-star review. That'd be so great. We would greatly appreciate that. But, of course, as always, if you want to support us the best way you can, what's the best way to support Irish Breakdown? There's a lot of different things you can do, but the thing that's at the top of that list, above all others, is to sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Always the best way to support us. We greatly appreciate it. You get monthly membership, you can get an annual membership, and we have a booster club membership that if you sign up for a booster club, you will then get some free IB merch. So you definitely want to check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Sean, we're going to dive into the final topic of today. And this one actually is going to have, I'll give a little secret. This one will have a Notre Dame flair to it. There will be some Notre Dame conversation today. We are now going to rank the 5 best newcomers at quarterback. Now, what is a newcomer? A newcomer is someone who's going to his first year as a starter at the school he's at, but primarily where he's the full-time starter. There's only one guy on the list that you could debate, does it belong on this list? What does not include being a previous starter is if you had some injury start. So like Arch Manning starting 2 games last year doesn't make him a returning starter. He was not their starter. He filled in 2 games for an injury. This is more so guys that are going into their first year where they are the guy. They're also guys that are we could have put new guys at new schools. We could have had transfers, but we didn't. Do you have your 5? Do you need me to send you your 5, Sean? You have this one written down, right? You didn't change any from this list, so you're good to go. So it could be freshman. It could be a senior who's never started before. It doesn't have to be a young guy, but in our instance, they are mostly young guys. So, Sean, without further ado, why don't you kick things off and break down who you have as your 5 best newcomers at quarterback going into the 2025 season. Actually, it looks like Sean froze up a little bit on there. So I don't know that we'll be able to get Sean's list unless that's me that froze up. So real quick in the chat, can you guys hear me? Are you guys seeing me, hearing me right now? Because I want to make sure that the issue right now is Sean and not my computer. Are you guys able to hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up in the chat? Let me know that you're hearing me right now. Okay, so it's an issue with Sean. So what I'm going to do then is I got to get a new list up here because I had Sean's list pulled up. So I got to pull up my list here. So just so people ask about certain quarterbacks, or the USC quarterback is not on the list because he did step in as a starter last year. He was their starter for a good chunk of the season. Andrew, I don't count him on this list. But I think it was Andrew that asked about that. I'm also not going to push back on you having him on your list, Andrew, because he didn't start the season as a starter. He came off the bench, and as I've said in the past, that's the case. But the other thing that makes me say why he's not on my list also is he did start for a full year at UNLV. So that's another reason he's not on my list for quarterback. So Sean is back. So I got to go back and bring your list up, Sean. I had pulled mine up because I wasn't sure how soon you're gonna be back, but you came back pretty quick. So let me get Sean's list up here, and Sean is going to walk you through his top 5 new starters at quarterback. And then while we're talking, we'd love to hear from you guys who you guys think are your top 5. You can also give your opinion of what you think of our list, but also want to hear what you guys think and what your list is. So Sean, without further ado, let's get things started with your number 5 quarterback, which is a true freshman.
Yeah, Bryce Underwood at Michigan. How can you not like what you saw from this kid watching this film in high school, being the champion that he is? I think it's a steal the way they got him late in recruiting from LSU.
LSU absolutely fans might say literally.
Yes, absolutely. So I love this young man. And it's funny because we were talking about all of the young guys that can go in this slot. And we had about 3 or 4. I settled on Bryce Underwood, and you settled on another one. But yeah, Bryce Underwood at Michigan, first-time starter, is going to be number 5 for me. Number 4 for me, of course, is whomever wins the Notre Dame quarterback situation. Like, they're definitely going to be one of the top 5 first-time starters in college football. C.J. Carr, Kenny Minchey. I think they're going to win a lot of games. They're going to show and improve and be part of or lead the way in what we talked about, which is the offense in the second year under Mike Denbrock, which is going to be more efficient and more explosive and put up more points. So you have to have CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie at number 4. At number 3, yes, Archer, you'll be happy. Julian Sand from Ohio State. The things we heard about this
He's
kid.
still not going to be happy. He's going to be mad he's not number 1, but he's on the list.
He probably is going to be, yeah. But, you know, what we heard about this kid, even last year during practices and leading up to the bowl game, and how he was running the offense, and he's just immensely talented. And then just the track record of quarterbacks, even first-time starters at Ohio State under Ryan Day, extremely successful. So Julian Sand definitely has to be on this list at number 3. Number 2 for me, Notre Dame fans, they are a familiar name, similar story. You hear about what he was doing during practices. Dante Moore at Oregon. Great expectations for this young man. The talent has never been a doubt. Just situations and, you know, UCLA with Chip, was it the right situation? Eventually he lands at Oregon in a spot that he's given a year to learn, 1 year in a system and grow.
You want me to make it simple, Sean?
Go ahead.
He signed out of high school with the school his dad wanted him to go to. He's now going back to the place he wanted to go to, which I think is going to benefit him. I'll say it. You're being nice.
I'll say it. Yes. You
don't disagree, though.
Today. No, I don't disagree. Dante Moore is number 2. And number 1, it was pretty easy, right? Look, you could talk about the name. It's not his fault that the last name he was born to, that's not his fault. But what is going to be telling is what he's able to do in an absolute favorable situation when it comes to roster, talent at the skill position, offensive line help, running back, and probably the best play caller and one of the best developers of quarterbacks in all of college football. It is what it is. He's coming into a perfect situation, and he has had multiple years in that same system and has actually been part of or been around big time games to recognize what it is that he's walking into. I don't think he's walking into this situation blindly. I think he's going to be very aware of what it is to be the quarterback at the University of Texas. Arch Manning, without a doubt, is number 1 on my list. So those are my top 5 guys that are first-time starters. And there were some guys that I actually considered.
I know there's at least one on my list that you considered. Let me ask you, did you think at all about Gunnar Stockton from Georgia? Did you think about him at all?
I did. I'll give you 3 names I thought about. I thought about Gunnar Stockton and CJ Bailey at North Carolina State because he wasn't the starter at the beginning of last year.
He fits in that criteria, correct.
Fits in that, but I was like, I was impressed with what I saw. And if he takes that next step, he could be a guy that we say, man, we should have put him on that list. And then I think Joey Aguirre.
Let me just say one thing about CJ, because I love that kid. He was in my conversation for breakout. Another name I had as a potential breakout was like Eli Holstein, who, if you look at what Pitt did when he was a starter, and then what Pitt looked like when he left, when he got injured, it was like a completely different team. But the only reason I didn't go with CJ is because you are correct in the criteria we've talked about. He didn't begin the season as a starter, but he took over in game 3. And passed for 2,400 yards and then, rushed for almost 300 yards. So that's the only reason I didn't have him on this list. If I counted him as eligible for this list, he's on my list. That kid is fun to watch, Sean. And he's a true like dual threat kid in a modern sense, in that he can sit back in the pocket and hurt you, but he can also take a game over with his legs. He's a lot like what I talked about with John Mateer, in that he can throw for 3 bills on you. But if he's having an off day throwing the ball, he can still hurt you because he can move around. So CJ Bailey was one that I had a tough time even thinking about which list does he belong to, Sean. That was really my issue with him. And I ended up selling on him being the returners list, which is why he wasn't on my list. But that kid, if you count him as a first-year starter, which is totally fair, it's hard not to put him on the list. That kid is fun to watch. For me, I'm talking about just for me. Really fun to watch. Really fun to watch. And who was the third one you said? What was the third one you said?
The Joey Aguirre kid from UCLA. I think he's going to be fun to watch as well. I think he's going to be really fun to watch.
Did he transfer in from somewhere?
That's a good question. I think he did. I had it right here in my notes.
Because he's basically taken over for the Garber kid that left last year, who's out of eligibility. So yeah, Joey. Let me see, where was he? Yeah, he came from. Looks like he was at App State.
App State.
So here's why he wasn't on my list, because he's a kid that threw for over 3,000 yards the last 2 years at App State. I'm just remember doing that name pop.
I said Aguilar. I'm sorry.
But he's a kid that's a 2-year starter. So to me, he fits in that transfer conversation more so than the first year conversation. Yeah. He's another guy that you look at. Any other freshmen, like true freshmen? Like that's the thing there weren't a lot of true freshmen I looked at and I was like,
I don't want to step on your list.
I don't have any true freshmen. I don't have any true freshmen on my list.
I thought about
I know Keelan Russell's one, but Keelan Russell's going to be a part of another conversation we're going to have here in the next month or so. We're going to have a talk about QB battles here in the next couple of weeks. And Alabama's in that QB battle where I don't know that we know who the starter is going to be. Is it going to be Ty Simpson?
No, we
don't. Wisconsin's another one. Is it going to be Billy Edwards? Is it going to be Danny O'Neal? Definitely don't have Deuce Knight on my list, Andrew. So, so yeah, that's an interesting group, Sean. But I was very curious. Like, I don't see a lot of freshmen walking into situations where I feel like they're going to thrive and be better than some guys who are. And part of the reason too is I think the most talented quarterback in the country this year is with the younger group. I think that's where the big time, like elite quarterback play is going to be this year. Is it's going to be these young kids we're talking about. Like if we're just talking pure talent, that group of 5 you just named and the group of 5 that I'm going to name, I think are more talented top to bottom than any of the other 2 groups that we had where it's more about experience and production and stuff like that. And I think that kind of factors into it. So let me do mine and then we'll kind of wrap up with it, Sean. My list starts with a kid at Ole Miss, and that's Austin Simmons. We saw this young man last year play a little bit. And I remember the first time I saw him play, I was watching the Georgia game. And first drive of the game, Jackson Dart throws a pick. And Georgia gets the field. They get a short field. They start with a short field, and they go down and score a touchdown. Well, Jackson Dart's still out. And this kid comes in and goes 5 of 6, 64 yards, and leads Ole Miss right down the field. And they get a touchdown. And this is a young kid, and I'm like, this kid can spin it. But it's a lot like what we've talked about with some other quarterbacks, Sean, where it's like this kid has no fear at all. This kid just had to step on the field against Georgia as I think he was a true freshman. I believe he was he was a redshirt freshman. He's part of the 2023 class. I believe he was a reclassified member of 2023. I believe this is that young kid that stepped up a grade. This kid has got a lot of talent. And wow, Lane Kiffin is not a top 10 head coach, Andrew. He's definitely one of the best offensive minds in college football. There's no doubt about that. And being a great offensive mind doesn't make you a great head coach, just like being a great defensive mind doesn't make you a great head coach. But not being a great head coach doesn't mean you're not a great offensive or defensive mind. And that's where I'm at with when you look at Ole Miss. Now, the only concern I had, Sean, was they did lose a lot of their weapons from last year. So he is going to kind of have a new look receiving core. But the one thing that Ole Miss kind of has done under Lane Kiffin in his few years there is every year they find guys that can catch the football and run really fast. But I'm like, but they got Trey Wallace. And I'm like, I watched him last year at Penn State. He ain't it. But it's a great system. The kid's got some talent. He showed me some swagger last year in his limited snaps off the bench. And he's going to have talent around him. So I have Austin Simmons, number 5. I would have been okay going with Bryce Underwood, Sean, but two things about that. Number one is I don't know that he's definitely going to start the season as a starter with Mikey Keene there from Fresno. And number two, of all the kids that I considered, he by far has the worst supporting cast. Like that's the reality of it. Number 4 for me is Julian Sand. I agree with everything you said about Julian Sand. I think he's a talented kid. I think he's a guy that's going to have talent around him. They're going to have a good run. They're not going to have the same running back room they had last year. But with James Peoples and the Donaldson kid from West Virginia, they're still going to have good running backs. It's not like they're going to have some bums. They're going to have the best receiving core in college football next year. And I don't think it's even debatable. They've got young talent at tight end that I like. Their offensive line is not great, but I don't think it's going to be terrible. But the other thing, too, is Julian's athletic. This is like he is a passing quarterback, but he is an athletic kid that can run. And I put him and Kenny Minchie in a very similar category, but I'd even say Julian, you might actually do a little bit more designed runs with than you had before. This is a kid, this is a good quarterback, Sean. This is a kid that's got a lot of ability. And he's number 4 on my list also because it's a lot like Austin Simmons. He's playing in a system where quarterbacks are going to put up numbers. Now, he's got to win the starting quarterback job. I completely expect him to. I think he'll beat out Taven St. Clair and then obviously Devin Brown's at Cal. But I like Julian Sand a lot. He's definitely on my list. I think he's going to be a really good player this year. Number 3 on my list, Sean, is whoever wins the quarterback job between CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie. If neither one of those guys wins the job, the Notre Dame quarterback will go down on my list. May still be in the top 5, but it definitely goes down on my list. I'm projecting one of those two kids to win a starting quarterback job. And whoever it is, I have them comfortably in that number 3 spot. A lot of reasons why. And the reasons I have both of them ahead of Julian Sand is I just think they're both better than he is. I think they're both more talented than he is. It's not by a ton. I think Julian Sand, I graded out as a top 50 caliber quarterback coming out of high school, but I had CJ as a 5-star. And I had Julian ranked slightly higher of Kenny coming out of high school, but it was in a year after Kenny. So Kenny has an extra year of experience, an extra year in the weight room. And I think Kenny has shown me some things in college that I didn't know he had. Kenny's mobility in high school was always geared towards extending and throwing. What he showed us at Notre Dame is that he can run and be a runner as well. And you add that to the element as well. So whoever wins the starting quarterback job at Notre Dame also is going to have arguably the best offensive line of all the quarterbacks in this conversation, is going to have the best running back room of all the kids in this conversation, and is going to have a much improved receiving core. It's not Ohio State's, but it's going to be a very good receiving core. You got Greathouse coming back. You got Jordan Faison coming back. You've got Eli Raridan coming back. You've got some talented young players like KK Smith and Cam Williams and Micah Gilbert might be the most ready to play of the young guys all around. You've got talent at tight end, and we haven't even got into the transfers yet, Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. So I think whoever's at quarterback for Notre Dame is going to be surrounded by a very good team, and I think they're going to put up numbers. And we just did a whole show on what Mike Denbrock's offense looks like in year 2. And so I think we're going to see these young men be able to take advantage of that. And then also the October-November schedule is not nearly as hard as and if people keep asking where's Steve, he's backing up whoever wins this job. That's where Steve is. Number 2 on my list is Dante Moore. Dante has a year on those other 2 guys, and Dante's a very talented kid. There's never been a debate about whether or not Dante Moore is talented or not. He is. I've seen him throw live. I've seen him on film. Dante Moore throws a ball as pretty as any quarterback you're going to find in college football. The questions about Dante are, is he big enough to hold up over the course of a season? Where's he at from a maturity standpoint? Is he growing up a little bit? Those are all things you can ask about, but this young man can spin it. I think his decision to go to Oregon, knowing he was going to be a backup, showed me that Dante is starting to take steps towards taking over his life and saying, I got to do what's best for me. And I think that year sitting at Oregon is going to be huge for Dante. Huge for Dante. Now, you look at what he's going to have around him, Sean. I've talked a little bit about Oregon. Some of my concerns about Oregon is they're not going to be as talented as they were last year. The offensive line is a question mark for me, but they still have talent. They have Evan Stewart coming back. They have Kenyon Sadiq at tight end coming back. They got Jamari Johnson to transfer in. They still have Justice Lowe. They have Gary Bryant. They got the true freshman, the Corian Moore, who's a stud at wide receiver, and they got Jeremiah McClellan, who was a high school teammate of Jeremiah Love. They're not going to have quite the talent they had last year, but they are still going to have talent. The offensive line is the only question mark for me because Dante is a pocket passer. Yes, he is a pocket passer. There's no doubt about that. If that offensive line takes some time to kind of gel, he will suffer from that. But by the time you get to October, November, that line will be in good shape, and Dante's going to put some numbers. And then the final piece, Sean, is he's playing in an elite offensive system. Will Stein's a brilliant offensive mind. He did it at where was he? He was at UTSA, and then he's done it at Oregon. He's an excellent offensive mind, and Dante is going to benefit from that as well. And then number one on my list is Arch Manning. We've talked about this before, Sean. We need to rehash overrated, underrated. At the end of the day, forget all whether he should have been the number one quarterback coming out or not. There's no doubt that Arch is talented. He's going into his junior season, which means he's now been in Sark's system for 2 full years. He's got some cleaning up of his throwing game he needs to do, but he's also a kid that brings a lot of dual threat ability to the table. He's going to have talent around him. His defense is going to be good. He's more mature. He's more physically more mature is what I'm referring to. The experience he got last year, starting those 2 games, will help him coming into this season. And the only thing that you have to ask yourself is, can he handle the immense pressure that's being thrust upon him because his name is Manning? That's an unfortunate situation in some regards, but in other regards might be good for him because he also grew up in the Manning family, and he has plenty of mentors to help him through that. But Arch Manning at the top of my list is a no-brainer, Sean. I think he's going to have a big year. He's playing for a great play caller. He's going to have talent around him. Yes, they went to the portal for some receivers, but there's also some talented young receivers. They're going to be very important parts of what they're trying to do that are returners. So it's not like he's got to work with like a brand new receiving core. He does have Ryan Wingo played a lot last year. DeAndre Moore played a lot last year. Ryan Niblitz, a returner from last year. Spencer Shannon at tight end was a kid that played for them last year. So, yeah, they lost a lot, and they have some newcomers, but they didn't go to the portal again to rebuild their receiving core like they did last year. It's all returners and freshmen. And so I think he's in a great situation, and I really like where he's at. So that's my 5, Sean. You had mentioned some of the newcomers that I thought about. There's also some transfer newcomers that I thought about. I said Ricky Collins at Syracuse is a guy that I looked at. We talked about, let me pull up my list. Devin Brown at Cal, Justin Martin at Maryland. Those are all guys that were kind of on my list. Gunnar Stockton is probably number 6 on my list. And I think Gunnar Stockton is the guy that has the best chance of making me say, what was I thinking not putting him on my list? And a big reason why I don't have Gunnar on my list is honestly of all the guys that I just put right there, there's a big gap between the pass catching options for these 5 and the pass catching options for Gunnar Stockton. The other thing too is I look at the play callers. You're talking about Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr. You're talking about Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. You're talking about Mike Denbrock. You're talking about Will Stein, and you're talking about C. Sarkisian. And then who's Gunnar Stockton got? Mike Bobo. Those are the reasons that I don't have Gunnar on the list. If Gunnar Stockton was still playing for Todd Monken, he'd be on my list. He might be number 3 on my list because he's older and the experience he got last year. But it's Mike Bobo, and then just major questions about the players around him at Georgia and in the pass game that are why I don't have him on my list. But Gunnar's the one that I think has the best chance to make me look back and say, man, I should have had him on my list. Anybody thoughts on my list, Sean? Questions, comments, anything? I mean, our top 4, we have the same. We just flipped 3 and 4.
Yeah, I love your list. I forgot about that moment, that drive that Austin Simmons came in against the Georgia game. That was impressive. I'm glad you brought that up. I had totally forgotten about that moment. But yeah, spot on. I think we're thinking along the same lines as you were talking about breakouts in this group. I think I go back to the first group and I'm like, yo, I can't believe that I left or didn't even consider Avery Johnson a little bit more for returning quarterbacks.
K-State, yeah.
Yeah, I think that young kid really has a shot.
consistency. It's the same thing with like
Yeah.
Lenore Sellers. It's the consistency, Sean. Like that's where Avery's got to take his game.
Yeah.
Now he was, I believe, a lot more productive than Lenore Sellers was last year. I believe I'm pulling up his numbers. Yeah, he passed for 2,700 yards, rushed for 6, had 32 touchdowns. So definitely more productive. But the thing for me with Avery is he had some moments where he looked very average, and he wasn't good in the second half of the year.
Pedestrian.
He only had 2 games. Yeah, he had 7.4 per attempt against Kansas on October 26th, and then 7.9 against Iowa State because he had a couple big throws. He had his last 3 games, he was sub 60% throwing. Now, again, I don't evaluate him the same way as a passer as other guys because he's so dynamic as a runner, and he did run very well down the stretch. But there was a lot of inconsistency from Avery, a lot like Lenore Sellers. That is why I didn't have him on my list. But he's a guy that you could also look back on, Sean, and say, boy, that kid's got a chance to be why did I not have him on my list? But it's honestly what you said about Lenore Sellers. A lot of that is true for Avery Johnson as well. That just consistency and being better in the big moments. That's what I want to see more of from Avery.
And then you can go stay in the same state right down the road to Lawrence, and a reemergence story could be happening with a kid like Jalen Daniels, who's extremely talented kid, right? And that Kansas team came on down the stretch in the Big 12 after a very disappointing start to the season. A kid like that could be a breakout, even though he kind of broke out, and then kind of underwhelmed last year. So we'll see if he can
Can't stay healthy.
Yeah,
that's the thing with Jalen Daniels, Sean, is like the guy's just got to stay healthy. Last year was the first healthy year he had. Yeah. And he had some brilliant moments. I mean, but then he also had some games you're like, dude, you threw almost as many picks as you did touchdowns.
Yeah.
And he didn't run like he has in the past either. Like we didn't see it because of the injuries. But But would it shock you if Jalen Daniels put it all together this year playing for Lance Leopold in year 2 of the offense? No.
No, not at all.
It wouldn't.
Not at all.
It wouldn't. There's a lot of quarterbacks like that, Sean, where you're like, man, there's some kids out there that have some ability, but man, they got to do this, they got to do that.
Yeah.
And this guy's got this injury question, this guy's got that injury question, and there's a lot of that too.
Somebody else that fits that, where he had McMillan his first 2 years, but he didn't have as great of a year as the Fafita kid at Arizona, who now will be in that system with his new coach for a second year.
Right.
So we'll watch to see if Fafita can return back to what he was able to do as a freshman. It's a lot of talented kids out there and a lot of great stories. Like you said, it's not as good of a class, but you might have some of the best quarterback stories in college football this year.
Yeah. And you speaking of stories, I think the Big 12 is going to be a lot of fun at quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
There's another guy that's a transfer guy who could also be a first-year starter that people keep mentioning in the chat, like Dylan Lonergan. But why didn't I put him in there? Because I don't know if he's going to start at BC. But he's another talented quarterback that could be like an Eli Holstein, who I didn't love Eli Holstein coming out of the port. Didn't do anything at Alabama in his first year. Goes to Pitt, and he was Pitt's offense last year. He's another guy that, could he have a breakout this year? Desmond Reed's coming back. Could he have a step up this year and break out as one of those top returning quarterbacks?
Yeah.
We'll see. A lot of intriguing. You're right, Sean. There's a lot of intriguing storylines at quarterback, but I just don't see a lot of elite quarterbacks outside of the younger players. Some of them, the most talented quarterbacks. Like if I'd say, okay, which group would you rather have? Would you rather take the top 5 returners or the top 5 newcomers? And you got to bet the mortgage on one of those two shining. I'm putting my money on the newcomers. Why? Because the talent is significantly better. And that's what makes, I think, this a really fun year. Really fun year.
I see literally there could be 5 first-round NFL picks out of the newcomer list that I had.
Yeah.
Literally. There could be 5 first-round NFL picks at the quarterback position.
Yeah,
out of that list.
I mean, I'll go even further. Maybe even potentially 6, because what if one of those 2 at Notre Dame doesn't win the starting job and then goes somewhere else and plays for a guy you know what I mean? Like, and there you go. There you go. So it is going to be a very fun year. Jalen Daniels is still at Kansas, by the way. Just want to answer Andrew's question. He is still at Kansas. But yeah, it's going to be fun to look at this list before the season, Sean, after spring battles kind of go through and we see spring games. But it's going to even be more fun to look at this list at the end of the year. Like looking back and what's our top 5 after the season is going to be a whole lot of fun. I can't wait for it. So great show today, Sean. A lot of fun topics. I hope you all in the chat enjoyed the show today. That's going to be it for today's show, folks. Do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And as always, make sure you have signed up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. For Sean Davis, I'm Brian Driscoll. We'll talk to you all again here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.